Okay, Mr. Chairman. Let's see, for roll calls, Representative Crank,
Excused. He's
I
not
don't
here.
see him in the waiting room, so
He's in the waiting room. Okay.
yeah. Representative Gray,
Here.
Representative Obermueller,
Here.
Representative Pelkey,
Here.
Representative Western, not in the waiting room.
All right, we'll excuse him for now.
Wait. Oh, I have Representative Crank now. Senator Beitman,
Here.
Senator Bouchard,
Here.
Senator Guru,
Here.
Senator James,
Here.
Vice Chairman Barlow,
Present.
and Chairman Perkins.
Here.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you. We'd like to welcome all members and those participating today to the Management Audit Committee. We appreciate staff putting this together. Welcome staff and any participants and also the members here today. We appreciate your attendance and the effort put in preparation of this meeting and that we take today. We have an agenda that I think that will take us well into the afternoon. I think there's a lot of important information that's been provided to us. That was very interesting, and we'll talk about that and where we go. So with that, I think, Mr. Vice Chairman, do you have any comments you'd like to make before we get started this morning?
No, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. With that, we'll go ahead, and I think the first, we've got the minutes from our January meeting. Is there any comments, reviews, additions, or corrections to the January 29th, 2020 meeting minutes? There being none, is there a motion?
Move for approval. Actually, I don't know if I can. I wasn't there. I'm sorry.
We have a motion for approval by Vice Chairman Barlow. We have a second from Representative Pelkey. All those in favor, please raise your hand to the camera. Okay, I see I see there, Senator Beitman, Senator Obermueller, you guys are appearing by voice with all those appearing on camera appear to be unanimous. Representative Obermueller, Representative Beitman, how do you vote?
Aye.
Senator Beitman votes aye. Representative Obermueller? Was he not answer on roll call? Representative Obermueller, are you there? You still show as muted on my screen, Representative Obermueller, if you're there. Okay, he's apparently not there. So, but anyway, obviously the majority of those present voted to approve the minutes. I saw no votes. With that, let's go to the review of findings and recommendations from Department of Audit and CPA audits relating to Wyoming municipalities and special districts. Senator James, do you have something?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. At what point during the meeting are we taking motions?
Well, what we'll do is if there's a motion with respect to an item on the agenda as we go through, we'll wait and take it at the appropriate time. Is your motion for, what's the nature of your motion, Senator James? You're on mute, my friend.
They would not be related to an item on the agenda.
So it's just a motion for the committee action as a whole?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Well, we'll take that. Usually we take that we have a committee discussion as the last item for, and we'll have discussion about other things about where we go and what we do moving forward today. So certainly anytime that you feel it's appropriate, if it's related to a subject matter or at the end when we take up any other business that the committee wishes to address. Either one of those, any of those times would be appropriate, Senator James. Is that okay? Are you planning on, or do you have, are you going to be here all day, or you have something that will take you away later?
I'll be here all day. I just think this would be is important. It's related to the committee as a whole and how we function as
Okay,
a
well,
whole.
we can certainly have that discussion at the end. We always have some of that discussion at the end. Thank you. Any other? So with that, Amanda, I think Amanda and Fred, we've got a number of people listed up here. So Amanda, we'll turn it over to you, I believe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the Management Audit Committee. I am Amanda and I'm a program evaluator at LSO. Due to our ongoing discussion regarding audit findings for municipalities and special districts, I'm going to be presenting the review of findings and recommendations from the Department of Audit and Certified Public Accountant audits related to Wyoming municipalities and special districts. The data included in the summary is from the original report, which was presented in response to the Management Audit Committee's request at its May 2019 meeting to review performance audits conducted by the Department of Audit and financial reviews and audits conducted by independent certified public accountants for municipalities, special districts, and school districts. Due to the complexity and falling under different statute requirements than municipalities and special districts, the school district findings are not included in the summary. In preparation for the November 2019 meetings, LSO staff reviewed the two most recent audits, including management letters from a sample of each type of public entity to identify trends related to findings and recommendations, entity responses, and governing body actions taken on audit recommendations. General findings of the reviewed sample audit show that internal control issues such as segregation of duties, preparing written policies and procedures, hiring or retaining appropriately trained fiscal staff, and appropriate oversight by the governing body are difficult to attain for small municipalities and special districts. Under Wyoming statute, Department of Audit is required to audit municipalities with a population of under 4,000, and Wyoming statute requires the department to audit all special districts. The public funds rules and regulations require level of oversight given revenue and expenditure levels. Special districts with revenues and expenditures over 1 million are required to have a certified public accountant financial audit completed annually. Special districts with revenue or expenditure levels over 500,000 and less than 1 million are required to have a certified public accountant review. The difference between these two is an audit requires a certified public accountant to gather sufficient and reliable evidence regarding the information provided in the financial statements. A review of an organization's financial statements provides a report issued by certified public accountants which express the financial statements are free from material misstatement. So going back, special district revenues or expenditure levels under $500,000 are subject to the department's performance audits. So according to department officials, there are a total of about 659 special districts that fall within 23 statutorily authorized types. Of the 659 districts, over 450 are under the $500,000 threshold, and therefore the responsibility of the department. The department's public fund division conducts compliance and performance audits for municipalities and special districts. Specifically through its audit process, the department determines 1, the accuracy, the information reported in the census report submitted to the department, 2, whether the reporting entity is in compliance with statute and regulations, and 3, to determine the adequacy of the internal controls of the entity. LSO reviewed a sample of audits conducted by the department and independent certified public accountant firms for 15 municipalities and 34 special districts. The findings documented in the department and independent certified public accountant reviews and audits for special districts were consistent with the common findings across the sample municipality audits. These findings include lack of segregation of duties, lack of policies and procedures, lack of proper internal controls, lack of governing body involvement, poor accounting practices, and non-compliance with federal, state, and local laws and regulations. According to the department officials' audit report content and responses from audited entities, many of these findings are results of small communities' lack of staff and qualified workforce, financial resources that make it difficult to properly segregate the duties, time to develop policies and procedures, and staff with adequate knowledge to ensure compliance with local, state, and federal laws and regulations. The department and certified public accountants recommended these entities could mitigate some of the increased risk to finances and assets by increasing involvement by the governing bodies regarding day-to-day activities, as well as reviewing expenditures and bank statements. Audit responses from the special districts generally indicated that all findings noted by the department and independent CPA firms would be corrected. In closing, proper internal controls measures are essential to protected entities' assets, financial and physical. Segregation of duties among an entity's staff members, especially those handling accounting functions, reduce the risk of mishandling and of funds and fraud. Involvement of the governing bodies of these entities provide an important oversight function for operations and are particularly important when segregation of duty is not feasible. Written policies and procedures reduce the risk of inconsistency of processes, which can lead to improper accounting and business practices, especially when an entity encounters staff turnover. And poor accounting practices increase the risk of mishandling funds and fraud. At this time, I stand for any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Amanda. Questions for Amanda, members? Senator James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Under statute 9-1-507, little j, Roman numeral 2, it talks about how if the legal reporting requirements are met, then the special districts are to be dissolved by the county commissioners by December 30th of the same year. How many special districts have been dissolved?
Mr. Chairman, Senator James, I'm unable to answer that question, but we can defer to the Department of Audit, and maybe they can provide some insight.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll hang on because Department of Audit will be on here in a second. Any other questions for Amanda with respect to her report, what we've done so far? So Senator Guru.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Amanda, of the 209 entities, political subdivisions that are $500,000 and above, based on what I just heard you say, do you have a sense of how many of those are not in compliance with their auditing procedure? I know if it's $1 million or more, they have to stand for an audit each year. I'm just trying to get a gauge if there was, people that are just flat missing that, or if they're, what kind, if it's prevalent or just a one-off deal.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Gru, thank you for your question. I'm unable to answer that specifically. Again, I'd like to defer to the Department of Audit to be able to answer.
And as long as if I can follow up, Mr. Chairman?
Please go ahead.
And the other, since we're deferring some questions over to the Department of Audit, and I want to just throw one more in to get this information as we go. Of those that are audited each year, I would like to try to get a sense of how many are using an audit firm or the same audit firm for more than a 5-year period. In other words, how many change audit firms, or is this something that just goes on? This is something I've kind of always noticed about that, but kind of nice to change it up every once in a while, and just see how many are doing that, or how many just go on with the same audit firm year after year. So that'd be a question I'd have too for whoever can answer.
Thank you, Senator Guru. Any other questions for Amanda? Senator James?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just curious, you were saying that the school districts were not able to, you didn't have enough time to get the school districts involved in this request, correct?
Mr. Chairman, Senator James, we actually left the school districts out of the summary due to the ongoing discussion with special districts and municipalities. School districts also fall under a different statute than these two entities. So we did not include the findings of the original report. So the original report did include the school district findings.
Would follow up, Mr. Chairman?
Sure, go ahead, Senator James.
Would we be able to get those?
Mr. Chairman, Senator James, I can provide the information to you if you would like a summary of the school districts. It is in the original report that was presented at the November 2019 meeting as well.
Please.
Okay,
Thank you.
Other questions for Amanda? There appearing to be none. I think, Fred, I think we've got Mr. Director or Acting Director Reif. Are you? There you are.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for inviting us to the meeting today. I have with me Justin Chavez, the Administrator of the Public Funds Division, and Auditing Manager Rich Cummings, who's an Auditing Manager in the Public Funds Division. So if it works for you, Mr. Chairman, these are the subject matter experts and can certainly answer the questions.
Okay. Your punt being recognized, we'll go ahead and please continue on. We'd like to, I'm sure you have some things you'd like to add. You've heard some of the questions. If you'd like them repeated, go ahead, but we'll go ahead and turn some time over to you for any introductory remarks or other remarks you'd like to make before the committee begins with questions.
Mr. Chairman, Justin Chavez, Public Funds Administrator. I don't have any specific remarks. I think the memo kind of summed things up pretty good. I did write down a few questions. I can address those at this time, or if you have others, whatever your pleasure is.
No, please go ahead.
Okay. So, Mr. Chairman, first question that I wrote down was how many of our entities get dissolved each year. A specific number I wouldn't have with me right now. Some entities do end up getting dissolved when we follow up, and others do not. We will regularly send reminders and ask for updates on those dissolved. But as far as a specific number, I couldn't say, but entities do get dissolved and some entities do not. If I had to take a guess, I would say probably single digits in any given year as far as those that are dissolved. Second question, the number of entities that aren't compliant as of December 31st, I'd say as a kind of a general figure, probably somewhere between 10 and 20 each year. On our website, we publish the annual cost of government report, and that report includes how many entities were not compliant as of the publication of that report. And in recent years, it actually tells you which entities those are. So you can look on our website under the cost of government report and see that for each year. And then third question I had is local governments that change auditors within a 5-year period. That we couldn't tell you specifically. That's not something we monitor. But off the top of my head, I would guess that there's not a lot in terms of changing of auditors. I think the entities tend to retain the same auditors from year to year.
Thank you. Representative Obermuller, you have anything you'd like to add about change of auditors? In particular, as being a recently retired auditor yourself, my recollection is that there's a significant requirement of independence with respect to auditors, and actually changing auditors from time to time requires some additional inquiry and insight if there is a change in auditors. Does that ring any bells with you?
Well, my reaction to it is, unless there's some evidence of lack of competency or lack of attention to duty, it's typically much more efficient and effective to maintain the same auditors. The reason is they become really familiar with who the people are, how the systems work, the progress of their, every business and government entity out there is a work in process. Nobody has arrived, so to speak. So if you have a good auditing firm that is continually nudging your clients forward, to break into that cycle and start with somebody new can be very disruptive. So as a general principle, I'd say continuity there is an important factor.
Thank you, Representative Obermuller. I know that with respect to CPAs, that they have pretty strict regulations with remaining independent and maintaining independence so that they can render an audit that is independent and they don't get too intertwined with their clients. So there also, as if I remember right, is if you actually change auditors, you have to contact the prior auditor and find out what unresolved and other issues there are there too, so that there continues to be an issue where you can't go out and shop an auditor for a better opinion, or find one who will be less thorough without at least checking in and finding out what the issues were in prior years with the initial auditors.
Mr. Chairman.
Sure, go ahead, Representative Obermuller.
One follow-up there, as you look at the distribution of CPA firms around the state, there's a level at which we don't really have the luxury of picking and choosing. When you look at the quality firms around the state, you'll find a lot of communities have one or two or maybe none. So it's difficult to find qualified CPA firms around the state, especially in the smaller communities. And each one of them, if you look at it, probably has at least one really qualified firm that can do this work, and that specializes in government auditing. I mean, like for myself, you might say, well, that CPA firm is here in town. Yes, I am, but I don't specialize in government accounting. I'm not competent in that area. So you have to have a CPA firm that's competent and has enough business to maintain that competency. So that kind of drives that in Wyoming too, in terms of that continuity issue. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You have to have that familiar with the yellow book.
Yeah, absolutely. That's
right. Any other questions on this particular subject? I do have a couple. So if we can go back to our friends at the Department of Audit, Jason, how many are there any non-reporters that out of the groups that are supposed to report? Did you find any that are non-reporters?
Mr. Chairman, yes. If I recall this last fiscal year, I think there was somewhere around half a dozen that didn't submit their census report to us at all.
And so so there's the 209 that have let's break that up a little bit more. Of the 209 that use CPAs that don't rely upon the Department of Audit, how many of the approximately six or half a dozen non-reporters would be in that group, the CPA group versus the Department of Audit group?
Mr. Chairman, I couldn't tell you that off the top of my head. I'd have to look at those specific entities. But I would guess that the non-reporters don't fall under the levels requiring CPA audits. But I couldn't say for sure without looking specifically who those entities are.
Okay, and when we have a non-reporter, what's the procedure with respect to the Department of Audit and following up on that?
Mr. Chairman, so we send follow-up letters to the governing body, letting them know that the entity is not in compliance, and that if statute requires them to be dissolved, that they're required to be dissolved. There are also entities that are subject to, if they're not compliant, we contact the county treasurer, and the county treasurer is supposed to withhold any state funds that are due to that entity until they are in compliance.
Okay, and not our non-reporters are they reported in our in the cost of government or elsewhere in any of our websites or other information we make available to the public?
Mr. Chairman, yes, we have that on our website as to who didn't report as of the time of the publication of the cost of government. And then if those come in afterwards, we revise that. So yes, you can see on the cost of government report who didn't report. And I believe we have a document specifically that lists all of those entities that didn't report.
Okay, thank you. Senator Representative Obermuller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the Department of Audit, does non-compliance means that they are not issuing their reports, or that they're not in compliance with standards, or what does non-compliance mean? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Obermuller, non-compliance means that the entity submitted its required documents to us. So that's the annual census report, which details their finances, and then any follow-up paperwork that's required based on their revenue and expenditure levels.
Follow-up, Mr. Chairman.
Sure, go ahead.
When they, as you look through these materials, you find entities, that have material weaknesses in their accounting environment. They're out of compliance with standards. Are there any sanctions in place regarding being out of compliance with standards?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Obermuller, as far as non-compliance with reporting, there could be in terms of the treasurer withholding funding. In terms of non-compliance with state statute, generally there isn't anything in statute that requires any specific effect if they're not in compliance. Statute generally says they shall do this, but there's nothing that details what happens if they don't. So we just report the non-compliance and what effect that non-compliance might have.
So in going back, and since most of these are, as we talked about, most of these are special districts, so not always, but for the most part, most of the revenue sources are local. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, they could be either through a mill levy or through user fees. Yeah.
Right. So most of the time it's collected locally, and and so when we talk about the treasurer withholding funds, we're talking, just to be specific, about the county treasurer holding funds. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, yes.
And then the responsibility for dissolution for either non-reporting or other particularly for non-reporting, is that the county commissioners are to dissolve those. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, yes.
Okay. Then with respect to, help us understand, I think we've talked about this before, but help us understand for the other, which are the vast majority, for the approximately 450 districts that are under the $500,000 threshold and then fall squarely into your oversight and your responsibility. There is a report that they make to you, and then ultimately you go out and make rounds to audit those reports, as well as the other financial issues with respect to the other 450. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, yes, we get the annual census report from all of the entities, which details their revenues, expenditures, cash and investments. And so we go out and visit the entities and audit the accuracy and internal controls related to those reports.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Any other follow-up members? Any other questions? Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm on the department's website, and I'd like to track down this list of non-reporters. I mean, I'm on your Public Funds Division website. Where do I go exactly?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray, top right, there should be a link for cost of government or legislative reports. And if you click that, then it should take you to a page where I think the last file, say under that first year, is the list of non-reporting entities.
Have you got it, Representative Gray? Okay, get a thumbs up. Representative Obermuller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one follow-up on the compliance with internal control standards. And just following up on my line of questioning there and asking the department, are there any incentives or disincentives for entities that have reports of material weaknesses or significant deficiencies? Is there any incentive or disincentive for them to actually improve?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Obermuller, not that I am aware of in statute.
Okay, thank you, Representative James. Or excuse me, Senator James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jason, so when you guys come across special districts or any other entity that you ask for reports and stuff, and they basically tell you guys to pound sand, how do you respond? And they don't give you any reports or anything, and they just don't answer. And anything that they do give you answers none of your questions or anything. How do you guys respond with that?
Mr. Chairman, Senator James, generally we would contact the governing body. So whether so in a special district, that's usually the county commissioners, to have them provide some assistance in pushing the district to get us what we need.
Senator James, yeah, once you start on a question, just members, just go ahead and keep asking your questions. You don't have to ask for follow-up. Just go ahead and follow up on your own. And if it gets out of hand, I'll jump in. So go ahead, Senator James.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And what happens if the county commissioners don't follow up and don't start the dissolution process or anything, and that entity still exists and they just carry on?
Mr. Chairman, Senator James, we just keep continuing to send letters that say that we don't have any authority beyond that. And so we just keep reminding the governing body that the statute requires this action to happen. And that's really all we can do.
And do you continue to post these letters?
Mr. Chairman, Senator James, we do continue to report who is not in compliance.
Mr. Chairman, I was just curious because I came across one such situation and I only see 2 examples of these, and or 2 letters. And the last letter is, saying we choose not to give you anything. And that's the last letter. And that was back in 2015. And there's no other communication between the department and this entity. And so I was just wondering, and as far as I know, that entity still exists. So I was curious if that's common practice and if the department finds this acceptable.
Mr. Chairman, Senator James, in terms of the whole picture, I guess I wouldn't say it's real common. For us, I wouldn't, not following statute is acceptable, but we don't have any power to enforce anything, just to report.
What do you need to make these entities follow statute and to give you what you need to make sure that they're accountable in spending the taxpayers' money? What do you need?
And Senator James, we probably have to give that some thought, but in terms of specifics, but some type of enforcement action that would be within our control rather than having to rely on other entities, because we do run into instances where the governing body takes no action as well. And in those instances, like I say, we can't do anything other than continue to report that an entity is out of compliance.
Because under Article 4, Section 14, technically we're responsible. And then we have to come to you and ask why you're not giving us the answers we require. So help us help you.
Mr. Chairman, Senator James, we could definitely, as a department, have that discussion in terms of what that would look like, and then get some information to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I don't just a clarification, when we talk about governing body, and you've continually referred to the county commission, but generally each special district has a governing board. Oftentimes there's a county commissioner who sits on that board, but so when we talk about the governing boards, are you sending letters to both the county commission, who's kind of overall responsible for the oversight and also the financial reporting, and that's also where the choke point is that the commissioners either have the ability to levy or not levy mill levies based upon that compliance. They also have the ability, the treasurer also has the ability not to provide funds for people who are the county treasurer has the ability not to provide funds or permit the funds to be transferred that are collected if they're in non-compliance. But when we talk about the governing body, are you notifying both the board then and the county commissioners as well as the county treasurer? Is that when we have a non-reporting, whether it's a non-compliance, whether it's a non-reporting or non-compliance with the various procedures, are we notifying all three of those, or who exactly are being notified?
Mr. Chairman, yes, we notify all three.
Okay. And so the responsibility for the carrot and stick under statute has been given to the county commissioners, which have the power to, they can refuse to allow the mills. They don't have to necessarily put in the mills, I don't think, is one resource. Or the other one is if the mills are put in, the treasurer has the right to withhold distribution of the collected money until compliance is reached. Is that your understanding, Jason?
Mr. Chairman, yes.
Okay. Thank you. And so so if we do this, we need to find a bigger stick or a bigger carrot or both in order to, if it's not working now, need to tweak that. We need to find a way to incentivize either the special district, the county board, the county treasurer, or someone to take additional action, or we need to empower your department with additional power in order to, again, either drive these folks to compliance or to entice them to compliance. Yeah, I mean, what am I missing? Am I missing something in that general summation there?
Mr. Chairman, I would agree with everything you said.
Okay. So I think that raised a few other questions. I saw a couple of other hands come up. Senator Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that Senator James alluded to what the process should be. I mean, Article 4, Section 14. I think there should be a provision that, and this is probably a simple one-page bill, where when this happens, it triggers another process where it comes back to us. I mean, we have the power to subpoena. We have the stick, and it's already in place. I mean, we've had these discussions about how we had a state examiner, and they had those duties. The legislature took that away from an examiner, and then in 1990, the people ratified that provision. So for 30 years, we haven't been using the stick at all. And I think it's time that we bring it back. I mean, when we look at the scope of how much government has grown, and we don't have a way to just get a simple report. And I think that we can even go deeper dives into some of these when we see this happening. I mean, I've seen surplus funds sitting in a lot of accounts everywhere. We don't even have reversionary clauses on some of this money. So, I mean, there's a bigger problem. And I think we do have the stick. I just think we just have to implement it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? Vice Chairman Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of years ago, the legislature did implement the budget reporting requirement or submission requirement. So as far as what kind of compliance are we having with that with special districts? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Vice Barlow, it's at about, in terms of just submitting the budgets, I would say probably 80 to 90% submit their budget. We still have approximately 80 to 100 special districts each year that don't submit their proposed or their final. So 80 to 90% are submitting.
Okay, anything else? Before we leave this subject, Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So on the website here on the list of non-reporting entities, it starts in 2018. I know we revised the statute in that year, but there were still reports required before that. So, I mean, in previous years, I mean, where is the list of non-reporting entities before the year 2018?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray, prior to 2018, we only reported the number of non-compliant entities. We didn't identify them by entity name.
Okay. That information is available though. I mean, you've got it as public information. If anybody wants it, they can request it still. Is that correct, Jason?
Mr. Chairman, yes, we could identify those.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? The Vice Chairman Barlow?
Mr. Chairman, to that point, since 2018, is it a cumulative list that shows people that shows both when people go on and off, or is it a annual list that is not cumulative for folks that have not complied from previous years? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman Barlow, it's an annual list.
Representative Senator James?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So since 2018, I notice on your audits of special districts, I don't see any. And so I was wondering where they're at. And yeah, so where are they?
Mr. Chairman, Senator James, so the years that are on our website is the audit period and not when we are doing those. So there's a lag between the audit period and when we do them because of the reporting process. So in general, we tend to kind of rotate year to year what we're auditing. So we don't audit, for example, special districts every single year. What we might do is 1 year we focus on auditing towns, then we might focus on auditing special districts. So we don't audit each type. And so, but to answer your question, all of the ones that have been published are out on the website. That's on the website is the audit period and not the actual time in which we did the audit.
Go ahead, Senator James.
But aren't you just, according to statute, you're supposed to audit special districts every year? Correct?
Mr. Chairman, Senator James, I don't believe the statute says every year. It just gives us the requirement to audit them. And so because we have different entities that we're responsible for auditing, we tend to do them in types. So towns 1 year, special districts for another.
How large is your audit staff, Jason?
Mr. Chairman, for our local governments, we have 6 auditors.
Okay. And you've got it. So you got 6 auditors to audit 450 special districts as well as the other. Are you municipalities? Are they also in that same group? So you've got 99 municipalities plus 450 special districts. Are they all you've got to audit all those folks with 6 auditors? Or is
Mr. Chairman, the 450 special districts, and then it's somewhere around 50 towns. Some of the towns that have less than 4,000 contract for an independent CPA audit. So we try to fill in the gaps on the rest of that. So 450 special districts, 50 towns. Those same group of auditors are responsible for doing the state agency performance measure audits, as well as the annual census process and cost of government report.
okay, thank you. That's a lot of auditing.
Mr. Chairman, yes.
6 folks. Senator James?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So what title do they have to carry to be able to do these types of audits in your department?
Mr. Chairman, Senator James, so we have staff auditors. So that's an auditor 2 under the state's classification system. We have senior auditors, kind of like a junior lead. They lead audits of smaller entities. And then we have a principal auditor, which is a senior lead that leads the bigger projects. And so that would be their titles. If you're asking about certifications, there's none required, but a number of our staff carry professional designations, the most common one being certified fraud examiner.
Senator James, you got anything else? Follow up on that?
Yeah, so that would be the title you would have to, certified fraud examiner would be the one that you would have to do these types of audits, correct?
Mr. Chairman, Senator James, you don't have to have it to do the audits, but we encourage our staff to gain professional certification.
But that's what these 6 people have?
Mr. Chairman, Senator James, 2 of the 6 have that designation.
Okay.
Leads.
So these 6 people are chosen because that's all you can spare? Or is there a particular reason why there's only 6?
Mr. Chairman, Senator James, yes, we have sections that are dedicated to specific statutory requirements. So we have 5 that are dedicated solely to audits of school districts. And then we have the 6 that are dedicated to local government.
Okay.
So Representative Gray?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm looking at this page on the special district audits, and I'm wondering, does not reporting influence your choice of which special districts to audit? Or you just, I mean, how are you picking which special districts to audit when you're in the year for us focusing on special district audits? You just put all the hundreds in a hat and just select a couple? I mean, what's the process, and does non-reporting affect that decision?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray, yes, we do so non-reporting may be a component, inaccurate reporting may be a component, time since they've last been audited is a component. Through the census process, we have regular communication with the special districts. And so if we're running into any issues with communication, that's taken into account. So could be a number of factors.
So the Sierra Madre audit, which is the last one from 2018 and the only one since 2017, just take us through a narrative of what initiated that and how the department came to the conclusion to go ahead with that one, because that was the one that they did in 2018.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray. So that came about from, we had already had Encampment, the towns of Riverside and Encampment on our audit schedule. Our previous experience with a JPB like that from doing Edgerton and the towns of Edgerton and Midwest, the JPB, we found issues in that audit. And so we decided that if we were already doing those 2 towns, to include the JPB that's managing the utilities for both of those towns.
Okay, anything else? Representative Western?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to kind of go back real quick on one of the points that President Perkins had talked about. So there's about 450 special districts, 90 municipalities that 6 state CPAs are responsible for. In your professional opinion, do you think that is an adequate number for the task at hand to thoroughly audit those towns and special districts? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Western, I would say that's significantly understaffed. Given that number of entities, it creates a very long time period between audits, which makes it difficult to kind of follow up and make sure whether or not findings are being addressed.
Go ahead, Representative Western.
Mr. Chairman, follow up. What would be an adequate number of staff to properly do the audits in a timely fashion? Thank you.
Well, let's back up before we answer that question. I just jump in. The stated goal has been to, I think, right or wrong, I think the goal was we wanted to have these audited, everybody audited with at least once every 10 years. So when you ask that question, Are you talking about to meet that goal of 10 years, or are you talking about, I think you need to give them some kind of time frame of what type of regularity you'd like to have with respect to the audit for them to answer that question.
Duly noted, Mr. Chairman, and thank you. Yeah, so I guess what would be an adequate staff level to meet the stated goal of once every 10 years? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Western, I'd probably have to do the math based off of hours that it takes to do one of the audits. But I would say looking at a 10-year period, probably a minimum of double what we have. And that might not even be enough because half of our year is taken up with the census reporting process. So really we only have 6 to 8 months of the year where our staff are available to do audits. I do know that, I think it was 2 sessions ago, when I calculated the hours based on the average time it takes to do a local government audit, be about a dozen years to audit all the special districts if that's all we did for the whole year.
That Representative Western, that answer your question?
It does. Thank you, Mr.
All
Chairman.
right, Senator James, anything else before we move on? Go ahead, Senator James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So since you have such a limited staff, when you come across entities that have giant red flags, don't you think it'd be best to focus on them when they continually have those issues over and over and over again and fix them and keep on them until they're done instead of moving on?
Mr. Chairman, that is a factor that we take into account in selecting what we're auditing. We do try to do regular follow-ups of entities. Again, we have no enforcement authority, so we can keep on them in terms of contact and what they're doing, but we can't force them to change anything or implement anything. And then just with the sheer number of entities that there are out there, I think we try to touch as many of those as we can. There's probably literally hundreds of special districts that have never been looked at. And so I think we want to try to get to as many of those as we can.
Thank you, Representative Gray. Or excuse me, Senator James, continue on. Wrap up your question.
I realize that, Jason, but some of these reports are only maybe a couple pages long. So I don't imagine they'd be taking that much time, and following up with them would be far more important, especially if they're ignoring your demands, which are statutorily required to do. And if they're just straight up ignoring you guys, you're supposed to be reporting that to us, so that way we can then follow up with them. And so that's what I'm trying to get at here. While you may not be able to do anything about it, we can. So that's the point here. We are able to.
Okay.
Senator James.
Do you agree, Jason?
So that's, I guess I would say that's the purpose of publishing our reports, is to make that public, so that those that are able to do something can. Like I say, we try to touch it as many as we can. We are in the process of moving to or implementing a document on our website that will have a running tally, if you will, of all of the findings from our audits and which ones have and have not been corrected through the agency. But that's in process right now.
Okay, thank you. Representative Gray, you were trying to get in.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, I mean, I guess one question I have, we heard earlier that maybe double the staff was needed to get closer to complete auditing, but we're nowhere near that right now. And so I'm a little bit perplexed by some of the back and forth here. I mean, I go on the website and I go on the special district audits page, and since 2017, there's been 8 audits, and 2017 seemed to be the most active in a decade. So I assume that was one of the years that you decided to focus. And I mean, if you were to take the 450 special districts that are under the $500,000 threshold, which is subject to the performance audit function in your department, I mean, we're on a rate of completing the special districts once every 200 years. At least that's my calculation. So, I mean, I guess I'm just, maybe this ends with the do you agree, but I mean, I'm just not seeing, we're not anywhere near the realm of being close. I mean, we're going, this is before statehood, we're on a rate of one, we'd get through one cycle every 200 years. So, I mean, can you talk a little bit about the rate we're on?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray, I would agree. We have a lot more entities than we have resources for in terms of being able to get to all of those in a short period of time. Like I say, about half of our year is taken up with the census process. And so that leaves only half a year to be able to do audits of local governments. And so if we are looking at how long it would take with just our available time, it's a lot of years.
Okay, anything else? Is there do we have any public people in our waiting room, or anybody else who wanted to address this particular topic, or any other public comment? Also, staff.
Chairman, this is Abigail. Nobody filled out forms to comment for today publicly.
Okay.
So we have Mr. Dugas is the only person in the waiting room, and he's on the agenda for this later this morning.
Okay. Thank you. Well, and we'll kind of, there's a couple things that kind of circle us back into some of this. Let's go on into it's now 8:20 at 9:04, and we're on to kind of the same thing. We're Department of Audit. Now we're talking about state agencies and their audit findings. Let's go ahead and move into that. Amanda, I think, yeah, Amanda, we're back to you on that particular. That's just under tab 4.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. In response to a request made by the Management Audit Committee at its January 2020 meeting, LSO reviewed audits conducted by the Department of Audit of Wyoming state agencies to identify trends in audit findings and corrective actions. LSO reviewed a total of 10 state agency audits conducted by the department between 2012 and 2017. These were obtained by the Department of Audit's Public Division website. The 10 audits consisted of 8 performance measure reviews, 2 financial audits, 1 which was a special audit at the request of an agency pursuant to Wyoming statute. So going over the performance measure reviews, as stated between 2012 and 2017, the Department of Audit conducted 8 performance measure reviews pursuant to Wyoming statute. When conducting a performance measure review, the department verifies and validates performance measures identified in the agency's multi-year plan and reported in its annual performance measure report. Agencies develop performance measures pursuant to Wyoming statute, which states that the multi-year plan shall include performance measures that provide methods and criteria to measure the agency's performance in conducting its activities and achieving its goals and objectives. Once an agency has established performance measures, Wyoming statute requires the agency to submit an annual performance report evaluating the outcomes of their identified performance measures with their annual budget request. The Department of Audit conducts the performance measure review using this annual performance report to see if the agency accurately evaluated their performance. When conducting performance measure reviews, the department and all 8 of the state agency performance measures reviews conducted between 2012 and 17 identified 3 main objectives. 1, to determine if performance measure processes and results reported in the annual report were accurate and reliable. Objective number 2, to determine if the internal controls over financial transactions were effective, including compliance with state law. And objective number 3, to determine if policies and procedures were in place to adequately protect and safeguard critical electronic data as outlined in state law and rules. The department rates each of an agency's performance measures. Obtaining a rate of certified or C from the department means the performance measure is accurate and supported by the appropriate documentation. Performance measures can also be rated with certified with qualifications, CQ, by the department, meaning the measure was accurate. However, the agency controls over the data collection and reporting were not adequate to ensure continued accuracy. If the department rates a performance measure as factors preventing certification, FPC, data used by the agency was unavailable or incomplete, and the controls to ensure accuracy were inadequate. After reviewing the 8 performance measure reviews, only 1 agency in which all performance measures received a certified rating of C existed. Lack of supporting documentation, missing policies and procedures, a missing strategic plan were the most common reasons for performance measures, and in the other 7 agencies received the rating of certified with qualifications or factors preventing certification. Moving on to financial controls, objective number 2, to address the department's second objective, performance measure reviews include a review of management's overall internal financial controls. In order to successfully test an agency's financial controls, the department compares a sample of expenditures from the state's accounting system to internal records kept by the agency. They also trace revenue receipts to supporting documentation and obtains information on contracts when necessary. After reviewing the financial controls for the 8 performance measure reviews, the most frequent findings among the agencies reviewed were missing or lack of supporting documentation and missing perjury statements, which it is my understanding that this is simply a statement signed by someone at the entity stating that they confirmed the expenditure. Moving on to IT controls. This is to fulfill the 3rd objective of the performance measure review. The Department of Audit determines if policies and procedures are in place to adequately protect and safeguard critical electronic data as outlined in statute and rules. Wyoming statute requires all agencies to adopt data policies, which include communications with ETS regularly. Additionally, Wyoming statute requires all agencies to follow ETS rules. The department interviews key personnel in order to identify the policies and procedures in place surrounding the general information technology controls of the agency. After reviewing the information technology controls for the 8 performance measure, the most frequent findings among the agencies reviewed were missing written policies and procedures and a missing disaster plan. The recommendations from the department for these agencies were to adopt written policies that detail the current IT processes and implement a disaster recovery plan to minimize the downtime and data loss and ensure an entity can recover if a catastrophic event were to occur. In addition to the 8 performance measure reviews conducted and reviewed, LSO also reviewed 2 financial audits on the Department of Family Services and the State Construction Department. Wyoming statute requires the department to perform an audit or specified procedures on any books and records of any state institution or state agency whenever the director feels the audit and procedures are necessary. An audit or specified procedures performed by a certified public accountant will be accepted by the department's director in lieu of the department conducting the audit. Each of these audits, the 2 financial audits, had a very unique objective. Therefore, there are no common trends across the department's findings related to the financial audits reviewed. The report itself, found in your meeting materials, contains each of these audit objectives, the scope, methodology, and the findings for the 2 reviewed financial audits. At this time, Mr. Chairman, I'll take any questions regarding the report.
Thank you. Members, questions for Amanda regarding the report or comments that she's made so far? Representative Obermuller.
This question is for the Department of Audit, in response to Amanda's report. Does the Department of Audit have any kind of standard template to give to these small entities that says, here's a way you can set up your controls and procedures? There's some commonality across entity lines. I would think that you could be helpful to them in that way. It's really surprising and frankly disturbing to hear that some of the reports are they don't have any written policies and procedures or documented controls. It's just really unacceptable to be at that level right now.
So we'll go ahead and Jason, did you hear that question?
Mr. Chairman, I did. And Representative Obermuller, we don't have any templates for stuff like that. I do believe SAO in terms of financial controls does provide some training and have some written policies. For our audits, for the most part, when we're talking about lack of written policies on the performance measure audits, is more so geared towards documentation of how they track and calculate their performance measure rather than anything having to do with financial transactions.
So while you're on that subject, Representative Obermuller, did you have a follow-up you want to make on that?
Yes, I do. I'm not sure where you draw the line between the financial reporting and the other controls and procedures that are in place. They all just sort of meld together. And when you hear that one of the findings is that they can't find the underlying document, I mean, where is it, in somebody's glove box? Or, I mean, how in the world is this happening that we don't even have the basic documentation? I just don't understand some of these lack. I mean, we're such a base level. It's hard to believe this. I don't know if there's a question there or not. I guess it's just common.
So Jason, let me see if I can, because I was really interested. I want to follow up on Representative Obermuller's thoughts. So when we talk about, because there's as we went through here, we broke it down into, at least in Amanda's report, we had performance measures and trying to audit those. Then later on, we get into fiscal controls, IT controls, and then financial and special audits became later. But as you went through, even in the performance measure accuracy, you would start off with state lands. It wasn't too bad. They had some good, some bad. But then you got in a couple of others, and I mean, as there was some reporting, at least in the report that Amanda put together for us, like if you go to the school facilities department, the department was unable to conduct a performance measure review because the agency was able to provide a strategic plan containing performance measures. You've got in the Department of Workforce Services, the agency did not have a 4-year strategic plan which contains specific objectives against which the agency could be measured to evaluate effectiveness during the annual reporting process. And as such, the department was unable to complete its performance measures review. I mean, I think that's what Jerry's getting at. And as we look at that, to me, it's a little bit it's a little bit concerning. Maybe it's sounds a lot worse than it is, but getting to, excuse me, Representative Overviewer's question. I mean, we don't even, in some of these, they're not even having any performance measures that you can examine or hold them against. But yet,
Mr. Chairman, correct.
so anyway, just help us understand, what does this mean, and how does this get rectified, or help us understand a little bit more, because I'm perplexed by this as well.
Mr. Chairman, so statute requires every agency to submit its strategic plan every 2 years. And as part of that strategic plan, agencies are supposed to have performance measures that give an indication of performance's work. And then on an annual basis, agencies are required to report the results of those performance measures. What you're seeing there is agencies that are not complying with that statute. They're not, they don't have a strategic plan in which they've identified any performance measures. And therefore they're not reporting the results of those measures on an annual basis. And so there's nothing for us to audit in those cases, because they haven't even come up with any performance measures for the strategic plan and annual report. So they're required to do it. But again, there's nothing that says this is what happens if you don't. And so for our case, when we go to do one, we report that they don't have anything,
Right.
but there's nothing in statute in terms of a follow-up action.
Right. You guys are the messengers. You guys are the messengers. You bring back the data. So when you come back and you have that, does that report then go? I mean, who gets alerted to the fact that, let's just pick on the Department of Workforce Services, that they don't have a strategic plan in effect or whatever else would be required to enable you to complete a performance measures review? When that finding comes back, who does that get reported to?
Mr. Chairman, so we report that to the agency head, we report that to the governor's office, and we report that to LSO.
Okay. And then I'll turn this back over to the other members of the committee. Let me ask this question. I mean, ultimately, from your perspective, you've got more years in government than, I mean, I've been in the legislature for a while, but and while I get a check from the state of Wyoming for my legislative pay, I certainly, I'm not there every day in the inner workings of how all of state government works. What would it make a difference to you? Do you think it would, just as a, you're not going to have, this is going to be a subjective response from you and the other three that are in the room there. I'd be interested to know if we started polling in, when we see this stuff and we pull in directors and department heads in, when we don't have the data we need to get to have these performance measures objectively identified and reported back, would it make a difference? Would it make a difference if they had to come before a committee and we had a good discussion about that? Would it provide any incentive or at least provide some additional accountability in your mind, in your years of state government experience? Would that make a difference, or would they come and would just be like, it's those guys, they'll go home and they'll leave us alone, we'll go back to whatever we do in the future anyway?
Mr. Chairman, I suspect it would have an impact if they had to sit in front of the legislature and answer questions as to why they weren't providing performance measure data that is required by statute. I don't know if either of my other two.
I would agree. I wouldn't want to be called in front of the committee and have to answer that question. So I think, can't speak for other directors, interim directors, but I think the fact that somebody's watching and requiring some accountability is probably effective.
Thank you. So let's go ahead. We'll go to Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to follow up a little bit on what the chairman just said, and that response is that I really think this committee, I mean, when I been on the Wyoming legislature here now 4 years, and my initial observation is that the Wyoming legislature has the same problems that we've seen to a lesser extent, but problems we've seen nationally with the Congress are present in all our states, but I've seen it up front and close in the Wyoming legislature. And one of those is that the legislative oversight function is lacking. And there's a lot of focus on churning out legislation, and legislation is important, but the oversight function within the constituent committees is lacking. And the Management Audit Committee should be the one that can head that up. And as we talk about the reimagining of this committee over the last year and a half, you know, you look at 28.1.115, it actually says those agencies, when they submit their performance reviews, the Management Audit Committee may review those. It says that 28.1.115, and really that should be inculcated as part of our process, that one, we get from LSO when there's an agency that isn't submitting a performance review that's identified in an audit, and two, we should in a cycle be bringing in the agencies that definitely don't have one, and two, probably all the state agencies on a rotation. That would be more difficult, or assign that out to the constituent committees of jurisdiction that are relevant. But we need to get better as a legislature at legislative oversight. We really do. Anyway, a couple comments. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. With that, Senator James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Regarding school facilities, since that department not only has failed to provide the requested this year, but also in 2016 and in 2014, this department has not filed a report since 2010, which would put this department in violation of 9-1-513 b, Roman numeral 8. So does this situation with school facilities department qualify under 9-1-508? Prohibited acts fail to make, return, refusal, to give information, hindering or obstructing examination penalties, which under little a person commits a felony, punishable by a fine of not less than $1,000 or more than $5,000, imprisonment for not less than 1 year, not more than 5 years, or both, refuses to make a required return or exhibit to the director of the State Department of Audit, refuses or obstructs access to information required by the director, willfully hinders, obstructs, or misleads the director in the execution of his duties, in any manner hinders the thorough examination the director is required to make by law. I mean, sounds like school facilities and probably a lot of other departments and entities have done that. So when they are saying that there's nothing to enforce, 9-1-508 sounds like there's enforcement right there in statute.
Mr. Chairman, Senator James, I think that's probably a question that would be more appropriate for, say, the AG's office. Our director does have subpoena power, which historically has not been used, and there are for willful not giving it to us. I don't know that generally most of this would fall into willful, we're just not giving it to you. It's that it doesn't exist. And so I don't know, like I say, that's probably better answered by attorneys in terms of whether or not something not existing would fall under that statute, as opposed to actively refusing us to give, or actively refusing to give us information that they have.
I will give you an example of a willful refusing to give you. Hanover Irrigation District in 2015. I will read you the response to the audit, to the Department of Audit. It says, per phone call conversation on June 25th, 2015, with President Dan Madden, the Highland Hanover Irrigation District Board of Directors has reviewed the audit report. It was discussed at the last board meeting for 2 hours. President Madden indicated there were items in the report they agreed with and some they did not. No details were given. President Madden indicated no written response would be submitted prior to the response due date because the governing body's schedules did not permit such time. That sounds pretty willful to me. I'll give you another example. 2014, another response to the Department of Audit. District's response, corrective action taken. Although the district is not obligated to follow Wyoming Statute 41-7-806 regarding bonding, the formation paperwork stated specific bonding levels. The district did not provide copies of the bonds as requested. No investment policy was provided. No policies or procedures manuals were provided. Although the district is not obligated to Wyoming Statute 41-7-804, Roman numeral 1, regarding board members, a list of board members was not provided to show compliance with the district's formation paperwork. They wouldn't even get board members. That sounds pretty willful to me. This is the district I was talking about earlier. In 2015, the Department of Audit has not done anything since 2015.
Mr. Chairman, Senator James, again, I think that would be, we'd be reliant on the AG's office to bring charges in that case.
Yes.
So it's not, we can't charge anybody with anything.
I know.
So that would be in the AG's realm in terms of whether or not they wanted to bring charges in that case.
Or in many instances, it would be actually back to the county attorney or the district attorney, and if you have a district attorney, because the AG specific, I don't know if the AG has authority to bring those types of cases, but I don't know if Abigail is online and wants to weigh in on that.
But I do believe it's time to start using that subpoena power, because these people don't respect you or the people or the people's money at all.
Well, Mr. Chairman, Senator James, I wouldn't disagree with you. I can't speak to having not been the director of the Department of Audit, I can't speak to those decisions as to why that power may or may not have been used in the past.
Okay, thank you. Representative Pelkey, did you have something you wanted to add?
I just had a point of order. The examples that have been brought up in the last couple of minutes are all districts, which was the topic that we just completed. We're focusing on state agencies, and I'm concerned about those because they're statewide and the budgets are much larger. And I'm wondering if we can focus our energy on the topic at hand.
Thank you, Representative Pelkey. I invited Abigail. Abigail, did you have any comment on with respect to Senator James's comments?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Typically in statute, when there's a penalty provision, it is the county attorney that has to bring those charges. There are a few instances where it says the Attorney General's office can bring those. They're peppered throughout statute. In situations like this, if an agency saw if there was a violation, they would have to refer that to the county attorney for prosecution.
Okay, thank you. So let's see, we're still on these audits. Senator Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we start looking at a bigger picture here. I mean, we've had discussions in the past about not having a inspector general. I mean, the government has a hard time investigating itself. But I think coming back to this committee, these are important issues that we have to, somebody has to be the bad guy. Somebody has to be the person that says, we're going to look a little deeper. We're going to look into this. So, I mean, I just want to focus, that I think that's our committee. All of this discussion brings us back to possibly honing this committee into that committee that has to do that work, so the entire legislature knows what's going on after we push those buttons. So I mean, because there's a lot of things going on, a lot of moving parts, and quite frankly, there's going to be people that don't want to blow a whistle or yell from the rooftop that there's a problem. And I think that over the years we've seen that. We've seen where there's problems that have happened and they get buried. It's this committee that's going to have to move forward in how we form, either reimagine this committee but I think we're going to have to do it in statute. I mean, I think that's what, as you know very well, Mr. Chairman, I brought a bill in committee. Senator Beitman and I were on that bill for legislative audits, and that would kind of clarify, I mean, how this committee works. And I think we have to go back to that. So I'll leave it at that.
All right, thank you, Senator Guru.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I'm not a lawyer, and I don't know necessarily if we always need a law for everything, but I do agree that we are, and I think that's what we're doing today, is trying to ferret this out. I agree with Representative Pelkey. Senator James' comments, I think with regard to those districts, I think there are things in statutes, and it lies with the counties to, they can, from what I heard the testimony, that they can dissolve those special districts if they're not towing the line. I think it may take us to redouble our efforts to let them know that we're watching and that we expect them to do it. And if they don't, that maybe there might be further action taken. I'd like to kind of get back to our own departments, which does concern me greatly as well. I think the points that were made about the school facilities are very well taken, and whether we need a special legislation, or we need to let those entities know that we're watching and we'd like them to come before us if they're not towing the line. I don't know. As a member of the Appropriations Committee, I can tell you from now on, when any of these organizations come before us, I'll be asking that question right off the top. What are you doing in these areas? Are you taking care of things, and try to bring a light that way? So I think it's definitely some good points about reimagining this committee, though.
Okay, thank you. Representative Gray. We haven't even heard from the Department of Audit on this yet. So Representative Gray.
Oh, I wanted to ask the Department of Audit a question. So have we not heard from them?
No, we let them, we asked them one question. We haven't had any comments from them yet. So no.
Okay. Well, maybe we'll do that first.
Okay. So anyway, we started off, we were in the midst of questions on the report that Amanda had gone through with us. And so at this point, we've got, and I think there's a number of other questions we want to get to the department, but that I have, at least we go here, but I wanted to go ahead and turn it over. Amanda, I think you were completed with your comments, if I remember right.
Yes, Mr.
Right?
Chairman.
And
Yes,
so let's go to the Department of Audit, and you've kind of heard the discussion. I think you've seen also a copy of the report that Amanda did. We just open it up for anything that you would have for us with respect to that report and these other reports on your audits and reviews of the department.
Mr. Chairman, again, I don't know that I have anything further to add beyond the memo. Just kind of some history, I guess, on the performance measures. I think initially when that was enacted, kind of the thought process was to tie performance measures to agency budgets and appropriations. That didn't seem to ever get off the ground. And so outside of the statute saying you shall do this, there's not a lot else, I'd say, compelling agencies to do it.
Okay, thank you. Now, go ahead, Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I guess going through this in terms of the performance measures part, I'm most disturbed by the school facilities and Department of Work. I mean, all of it, but would you agree those rose to the top of the concerning responses? And I mean, when they don't have the performance measures, I mean, I guess you send a letter to the governor. I mean, are you on the phone with the governor? I mean, I think it should rise to that level. I mean, are you calling the office and saying, look, this is clear lack of compliance? Is it just a letter? I mean, was there a response? What was that communication like?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray, it would just be a letter that goes to the governor's office. We wouldn't make a phone call or anything. It would just be a letter that says we couldn't do this audit because no performance measures were submitted by the agency.
So let me ask you, whether it's Jason or Director, I mean, I think you kind of see I think it's a quandary that you have. I don't know, it's a quandary you have. You go out and do these performance audits and you come back and you don't have the ability. In some respects, it's the performance measures, accuracy. Some places it's financial control. I mean, as you look at that, I mean, do you have suggestions for us as to what would make it different? I mean, the object isn't to beat people over the head. The object is to get people in compliance, and not just for compliance sake, but obviously performance measures are really important. What are we spending our money on, and what are we getting? What's the result of the money that we're spending and the efforts we're making in each of these departments, as well as that financial controls, as well as IT, which we've had IT security and IT data security and data corruption, other things like that, everything from being kidnapped. I mean, those things are all really important to the operation of the state of Wyoming. Do you have any suggestions or things that you would think would be helpful for us, or things that we've got to focus our attention on in order to help move the state forward in a number of the areas that you all have identified as either non-compliant or in some cases inadequate, if not wholly lacking?
Mr. Chairman, I'll give my answer and then the other two can weigh in if they want, but.
Please do. We'd love to hear from you as some of your thoughts. You guys are the ones that are the eyes for the people, at least the administrative branch of government, executive branch of government. So yeah, we'd be really interested in any of your thoughts, that and plus your years of experience in this area.
So I think as a really good first step, you hit the nail on the head earlier in terms of bringing directors before you and asking about it. I think adding that layer of accountability as to why didn't you do this, I think would go a long way towards at least the performance measure side addressing those issues.
Mr. Chairman, Rich Cummings. I think if you're looking to, obviously in this particular case, school facilities department, they didn't have measures. That would definitely be a concerning one completely. But when you're looking at our reports and you're looking at our certified with qualifications and our factors preventing certification, I think that they're giving you the purpose of that portion of the report is as to whether or not the data that they're reporting to you can be trusted or not, So when we report FPC, the factors preventing certification, yeah, absolutely. I think that you guys should be paying particular attention to that, because what it's going on is, one, either from year to year, they're being inconsistent with what they're reporting to you and what's really supported with it, or they don't have any data to support what has been reported on the thing. As you know, I mean, those are the things that you really need to be paying attention to when you're looking at this. Obviously, I mean, from my understanding, obviously, is that these state agency performance measures are they're a way of where you guys, the legislator, the governing body, can analyze and have a measure as to how well they're performing in the areas that you want them to be performing in. You know, that's partly what it's all there for. I think the part in the statute that says that the management audit committee may review these performance measures when they're submitted on the strategic plan. I think that's the purpose of it, is to see, are those the strategic measures that you guys are wanting them to have in terms of where the direction that they're going to go. So yes, I do think that you guys calling them forward absolutely is a great idea.
Thank you for that, Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will say my background at the Department of Audit has generally been in the banking division. And so I have experience with, as a bank regulator, not only coming up with findings, sharing findings with the bank, but also holding that bank accountable. We have some ability as regulators to have an accountability item. And in this part of the Department of Audit, it feels a little different because, as you've all pointed out, as they pointed out today, we're really the messenger. We're reporting the findings. And so where that accountability comes from, short of a fraud or some of that really gets through the AGs or the attorney at the county level, then there's got to be an accountability somewhere else, because we can continue to report it. But without an accountability backstop, I don't know that things will improve. I do think context is important too. Just like in a bank exam, sometimes you'll have findings that need to get corrected. Those findings don't always mean that the bank or the bankers are willfully trying to avoid their responsibility. Perhaps it's a training issue. Perhaps there was a turnover issue. Those are things that then can get fixed in real time as you go forward. So some of these things aren't always willful or negligent. Sometimes they're things that can be enhanced by training. And I think there'll be a discussion later this morning from some of the LSO research that talks about some of that. So I think having accountability before the committee as to why an agency hasn't done what it's required to do would require the director to have that honest look back and then be able to answer you.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate your candidness. Thank you, members. So as we go, I think there's lots of information here. If we want to, Amanda, I'm assuming that you have, for example, if we go to page 4 of 10 on the report, you've got, we'll part the Department of Revenue. Department of Revenue audited 12 performance measures for the agency. This is one of the better ones. The department rated 7 measures as certified, 1 measure certified with qualifications, and 4 measures as factors preventing certification. So I think, Amanda, I'm assuming that you have those reports, so that if we want to dig down and we want to know exactly what those 4 measures as factors preventing certification, that's available in the reports that you have. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have the reports from the Department of Audit that explains exactly what performance measures received what rating. If the committee is interested in knowing the specific performance measures, we can get that information together for you all. Right,
and then also obviously, as far as those reports and between Amanda, between you and our folks from the Department of Audit, again, we're just staying with the Department of Revenue reporting. This is just on the performance measures portion. Additionally, there were no written policies and procedure for 8 of the performance measures, which could create a potential for weakness if an employee left the agency. So what we're talking about there is that I'm assuming, I won't assume anymore, but what we have is how specific are the reports with respect to those performance measures that are lacking? I mean, obviously they can't tell us what they should be, but how much detail does it go into about when we don't even have the performance measures against which we should be measuring the measures against which we should be measuring performance?
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to defer to the department and see if they can answer that regarding the specific reports and written policies, because I don't want to assume as well.
All right, thank you. So we'll go back to our friends of the Department of Audit. So on those reports, when we start looking at those, what help us understand when we get those? And I think you already pointed out it's looking at particularly when you have the measures as factors preventing certification. You know, those may be relatively innocuous, or they may be very substantial. So help us understand when we look at your reports, what should we be looking for in your reports to make sure that when we get those, we understand what we're looking at and what may be potentially actions we should be taking from those.
Mr. Chairman, so as far as the factors preventing, you would see a description of what led to why we couldn't certify those measures. And so that detail is probably going to vary from agency to agency in terms of why we couldn't certify that. But I'd say in general, it would be because they haven't adequately defined what makes up the performance measure or how it's calculated. Or a common one we see, for example, is that the data from that performance measure comes from what's termed a dynamic database. In other words, it doesn't have dates in it. And so when we come into audit, they can't recreate the data that made up that performance measure at that point in time. And they didn't take a snapshot of, if you will, of the data at that point in time. So we don't know, we don't have the population of data to be able to audit to determine if it was correct or not. But in general, you should see a description of what led to us not being able to certify that measure.
And so by the time it would get to us, it's also obviously gotten back to the department. And so if we call a department, if we were to bring a department before us, or even if we were to subpoena documents or other items from these departments, it would not be a surprise to them what we're asking for, because they would already receive that report back from you, probably for preliminary comment, even before it's published to the rest of the legislature, to the rest of the state. They would have the opportunity to look at least preliminary findings and report on those. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, yes. In the audit process, once we have our findings, we always go over those in detail with the agency, and then they're given an opportunity to respond before we publish that final report. So yes, they would be aware of all of the findings and have given an opportunity to respond before that report is published and gets distributed to LSO.
Okay, thank you very much. Members, other questions? Yeah, it was enlightening report. You know, at the Department of Audit, I mean, obviously, Amanda put together a great report, but she did it by reviewing your documents. So, you know, I think we're all looking to get the same thing and some, you know, some additional oversight, and more particularly trying to make sure that we're accomplishing what we hope to accomplish with the expenditure of public funds. Let me turn to IT controls for a second. I had some grave concerns on some of the IT things. The IT findings on when we're going back in these reviews and audits with respect to findings, particularly when we lack data security, system security, how much of that it becomes public, and how much of that, if any, is confidential, so that people who want to penetrate or corrupt or otherwise cause havoc with our data systems, you know, how much information is too much information, or is there information, is it all public, or is there some that's confidential, that's held, that is still made available to us or to the directors that is not made available to the public? Help us understand a little bit more about the IT controls and some of those concerns in reporting.
Mr. Chairman, we do evaluate whether our specific findings would be sensitive to the level of giving anyone with potentially bad intentions information to harm any network or data. So we do segregate our findings into ones that we make available publicly and ones that we don't. In terms of our state agency performance audits, what we restrict the evaluation there is whether or not they have the policy. Because the statute just requires the policy. We don't get into the details of whether or not what they're doing is has any weaknesses. It's just the policy. Now on the school district side, we get more into looking at weaknesses, and there we will separate for sure. Generally, the audit report would say we identified IT findings, but due to their sensitive nature, they're not available publicly. And so those go just to the entity, and in this case, a governing body in terms of WDE. And then on an annual basis, we provide that information to the Joint Education Committee in terms of those findings. But to circle back, yes, we do separate sensitive versus non-sensitive so that we're not creating potential avenues for someone to attack networks or data.
And so, and then going back while we're there and for the IT, if they don't have policies, ETS already has. I mean, we already have a fairly common template that they can apply for policies. If they don't have, at least it gives them a good starting point. Isn't that correct? I mean, we do have fairly standard IT policies. So adopting one from another and then beginning an adapting process, but you can have at least some basic ones. Those are pretty much available, aren't they?
Mr. Chairman, I do believe ETS does provide some templates for IT policies. In terms of what we're looking at on the state agency audits for data security, I don't know that there's anything specific from ETS because that's pretty agency specific in terms of you have to catalog all the information you collect, why you collect it, what gives you the authority to collect it, and then detail out what you do with it, how long you keep it, that type of stuff. But I couldn't say for sure if ETS has anything for that kind of detail. But in terms of general IT policies, I do believe ETS has templates.
So if you could, Amanda or Abby, whoever does that, can you follow up on that, and let's get a real answer to that on standardized, or at least a template for those types of policies. Same thing for financial controls. I think A&I, at least on financial control policies and written policies for national, ATI provides or has those available for at least a template, at least a basic starting point for any type of agency or department. Isn't that so, Jason?
Mr. Chairman, I do believe they have policies out there, or templates that agencies can refer to.
Yeah, I think so. So Abby, if you can check that too, let's just make sure we know that before we start actually shooting at people. Let's make sure that we we have that information and that we're sound in that assumption. Representative, let's go to Representative Obermuller and then up to Senator James. Representative. That mute button's on there somewhere. There you are.
It was hiding. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is for the department. As you go out and audit these entities and all the hundreds of entities that we have, can you kind of describe the array of accounting systems that are out there to track some of this stuff? Are we talking about QuickBooks? Are we talking about manual spreadsheets? Are we talking about more sophisticated environments? Can you generally describe what you see out there in terms of the systems that are in place?
We're in the agency system, so this particular sections, we're talking about agencies. So
yeah, let me modify that to just being for the agencies then.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Obermuller, all the state agencies use WOLFs.
Thank you.
Representative or Senator James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jason, you mentioned that you wouldn't be able to pass on or release certain information due to the sensitive nature regarding like school facilities and education. And I was just wondering if there'd be more sensitive, if they considered that particular department to have more sensitive information compared to like the Department of Insurance or the Department of Health. And so I was just wondering if you had a comparison in that, if there'd be restrictions in those departments versus the Department of Education.
Mr. Chairman, Senator James, when we're looking at our IT findings, we would consider items such as the type of data that's housed in an evaluation of whether or what that sensitivity is. So yes, that would be a consideration.
Would you be able to give an example of the type of information that you would normally not release from, like, let's say, school facilities?
Mr. Chairman, Senator James, so we wouldn't release any IT findings that had to do with security. So if we were auditing that entity and we identified, say, that they don't have any, their computers don't have any lockout setting. In other words, you can try to log in 1,000,000 times and it never locks you out. That type of stuff we would not report publicly because it creates a security risk. Then somebody knows with appropriate computing power, they can just brute force that until they end up hitting on a password. If it's other things that aren't security related, so if they don't have written policies and procedures, that would be something that we could report publicly, because that doesn't give you any insight into any type of security setting.
What about regarding the financial aspect of it?
Mr. Chairman, Senator James, I don't think there's anything on financial aspect that we would withhold. That's all public information. And so none of that data would be withheld.
So in theory, this should all be pretty standard across the board. It should be pretty simple to come up with a standardized process when you go come up with a sheet for us. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, Senator James, I'm not quite following what you're asking.
It was asked to come up with a sheet on how you decide to, like a standardized procedure on how you decide to audit these departments, correct? Right.
Mr. Chairman, Senator James, so you're looking for a checklist from us on how we decide what agencies to audit, or a checklist on what information we would consider not public?
No, I was I thought I heard someone ask for some sort of checklist on what you ask from each department on what you request as far as like the IT and the financial services and on this current sheet that we're on right here on the findings. Or was I mistaken? I think I was mistaken, judging by your response.
Yeah, I'm not clear what you're asking.
Okay, disregard that.
I think Senator James was kind of following up on my question, which was what I thought you maybe were asking Senator James was that, how can there be that much difference between IT written policies versus accounting written policies versus those types of things? And I think your answer is, there are templates out there on those things. There may be some specific issues related to the departments, but ultimately, your financial reporting and your substantiation requirements are the same, whether you're in the Department of Workforce Services or you're in the department or the School Facilities Commission or department, correct?
Yeah, that question.
Mr. Chairman, Senator James, yes, it should be fairly consistent across agencies.
Yeah. Right. Now, I mean, you go back on your point, going back to school facilities. I mean, it was, you look at the example where I can't remember what school it was in, but anyway, they were using major maintenance when they should have been using construction, and they weren't allocating to the right. They didn't have the right allocation between what things were supposed to be paid for by the state and what things were supposed to be paid for through locally. It was a bit, it becomes a problem when we're not doing it correctly, and it has direct financial and fiscal impact to taxpayers, whether they're local or whether it's statewide. I mean, that was that was one of the findings that we had, and those things we just got to get better at them. I mean, we got to get better at them.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Director Ripe here, if I may. I think you'll find, or what I have found, is that there are a suite of policies, for example, at ETS, that cover the host of IT issues throughout the state that apply both at the state level and the department level. And then it's up to the agency then to go beyond that and refine for the specific agency. I think that's true also. For example, you mentioned A&I. There are policies out there for procurement that are very detailed that apply to the agencies, to A&I, to ETS. The state auditor's office, the treasurer's office, all have policies that apply across the spectrum. And then, for example, there's a purchase card policy for the state auditor's office that apply to each agency. And then within the agency, it's up to the agency to go into greater detail to refine that at the agency level. But I just don't want us to get away from this morning if we can I don't want there to be the lingering idea that there aren't policies for these things across the state. There are, in fact, policies. And then at the agency level, there needs to be more detail to address these items.
Oh, I get it, but there's just not, I think my point and Senator James' point is there's not much of an excuse nobody really has to start from scratch.
Yes, I agree.
You start with, there's a basic set and then you're going to hone those. But in the meanwhile, even if you don't, there's kind of a default that you get back to with the overlying or underlying written policy that is pervasive regardless of department.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Okay, so with that, I've got us at 10:06. We are, this may be coming back to, we're a little bit behind, but why don't we go ahead and take a 5-minute break? Representative Gray, before we do that, do you have something?
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion on this topic.
Okay.
Yeah, I would move that we draft a letter, 2 separate letters, one to the department heads of the Department of Workforce Services and School Facilities Department, informing them that they're out of compliance with the performance reporting, performance measure reporting requirement in state statute, and that is concerning to the committee. And then another letter to the chairman of the Labor Health Committee, informing them of this, the Department of Workforce Services case, and then the School Facilities Select Committee and the Education Committee in the case of the School Facilities Department. And then that we ask both of the agency heads in those departments to come to the next committee meeting for questioning and legislative oversight.
Mr. Chairman,
Abigail?
I will point out school facilities after this audit came out was combined into now that it's the state construction department. So things were switched up a bit, but we can send it to the current department head.
Yeah, I think we can adapt that. If nothing else, if they've got it corrected, they can come and tell us that, and it's wonderful. That'd be the best of all worlds. If it's not, we can review some of our concerns. So anyway, yeah, so I appreciate, thank you for that. We've got a motion discussion, Representative Obermuller.
There, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Do we have a second on that motion? Okay, Senator Beitman's got a second. Okay, Senator Representative Obermuller.
I don't necessarily disagree with the idea, but I think it might be a little premature at this point to move this one forward before we have kind of an overarching plan ourselves of how we want to deal with the multiple of issues here. So cherry picking a couple agencies right now for a letter, I think is getting out ahead of it just a bit. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Obermuller. Other discussion, Representative Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't think this is cherry picking. I think this is just simply, let's ask some questions and find out what's going on. We haven't made any decisions on what we would do, even if we found anything. Let's move forward and just ask some questions and find out what's happening. So I think it's a great thing to do.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think that we can ask our staff to follow up based on 3-year-old or older audit findings to see what has been rectified out of those findings. And I think LSO staff could do a follow-up with the agencies, not needing a letter or anything else, just follow up with the agencies based on these findings at our request. So I think we can get some follow-up. I think to go to Representative Obermuller's point is, I think we need a broader approach to all these others, but it's specific to these state agency ones. I think a simple follow-up by our staff with the agencies, because all of these audit findings are at least 3 years old, and they're for years previous to that. So we're talking about stuff that's predates some of our service in the legislature, activities that predates some of our service in the legislature. So I think we can get to this. We don't need to have letters. Our staff can take care of it.
Okay, so what I took your comment as a motion to revise a letter to follow up as a follow-up, as a staff follow-up. The only thing basically that doesn't necessarily demand that they appear in front of the committee, but a letter from LSO. Is that the way I took it, or is that just speaking in opposition to the motion, Mr. Vice Chairman, just so we understand?
Mr. Chairman, I think a letter from you as the chairman of the committee asking for those entities that are named in that in our review report as a first step to say what has occurred in response to these audit findings and how have you rectified these things. That I think that would be the first good step. And if as they respond to that, LSO can say, well, they're not doing it, then we start calling people in front of us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so that I think that's an amendment to the motion is the way I take that. Is there a second to that amendment? I have a second from Senator Guru. So we're on that amendment. So discussion on that amendment.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Gray.
Don't I have to agree that it's friendly?
Not well. If you agree if it's a friendly is whether or not we take a vote. If you want to agree it's friendly, we don't have to take a vote on it. So.
Oh, okay. We're doing it as an amendment. I got you. Thank you.
So do you think that's a friendly amendment, Representative Gray?
No, I think we should bring it out for discussion. I mean, I think there's elements of this that are good, but there's some that aren't.
All right, so we're discussing the amendment to the motion from the vice chairman. Further discussion on the amendment to the motion. Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we're kind of, and it's fine. I mean, this is back and forth and we're trying to it's a deliberative process, but I think we're getting a little off track here. I mean, for one, I think that there's nothing wrong with bringing in the chairman of the agency heads in those two situations anyway. I mean, I think to come to the committee and just, the idea here is that sometimes in life, I found that you've got to give a certain, I think this will reverberate across state government, that management audit is taking a look at this, and it's not just about two agencies, okay? This is about creating a culture of accountability. And part of the ways you do that is when there's a problem, yeah, it might be picking something that we've identified, but we've identified it. And there's probably other problems. But the point is that you create a culture of accountability by saying that in the capacity that we have in the legislature, that we are indeed following up on it and being rigorous when we do identify something. And so, I mean, I guess I'm going to vote no on this because I just think that, one, the agency head should come before the committee. I think the letter itself, I mean, I think we're splitting hairs a little bit in the letter. I mean, I think it's pretty similar to the original motion, but I just think the original motion kind of encapsulated what we can do. And I just think we need to get better at legislative oversight. It's disappointing to me that this is somewhat controversial, but I guess, I don't know, maybe controversial is the wrong word, but I just think that we should be really excited about this. I'm excited about the possibility of us getting some accountability here and talking about these issues. I love being on this committee. And hopefully getting improvement through that process, because that's what we're seeking in a positive way. So I'm going to be voting no on this amendment. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Others, we're on the amendment. Senator James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too will also be voting no on this amendment. It is our job as this committee to be looking at these departments. I mean, the two departments that were picked out are the ones that had the most issues. One of them just straight up refused. Not only straight up refused, but hasn't done anything for 10 years. So those were good choices as far as I'm concerned. Writing a letter, I highly doubt will do anything. As we've seen and can see from the Department of Audit's website, most of the time letters don't do anything. They just ignore it. Or if they do respond, they'll tell you to pound sand. That's just how they respond, because they just don't care. So I agree with Representative Gray that having them come in or on here will set a precedence. We're doing our job. Article 4, Section 14. It is our responsibility. We put that in place 30 years ago when we took that examiner position away. So we're just doing our constitutional duty now.
Okay, thank you. Are we off any discussion? Senator Bouchard?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Yeah, I want to say I'll be voting against the amendment as well. I think we had all of this discussion about doing this very thing, and then when we get up to it, we say, "Oh, let's not do it." I mean, I just don't understand why we would even think that that's an appropriate action for this committee. So I will be against this amendment.
Okay, thank you. Everybody will get a chance to vote. Senator Garou?
I just want to throw it out here on and for the amendment. I don't think that we're abdicating anything. I don't think that we're turning our back on anything. I don't think that we're doing anything more than just taking one intermediate step and say, hey, let the chairman go out and let the LSO go out and talk to these folks and see what's happening and then let's find out, see if they can correct it. If not, bring them forward and then we can have at them. But I think it's achieving the same result. I think it's just doing it in a different way. And I'm on and for the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Are ready for any other discussion? Ready for the amendment? Representative, excuse me, Vice Chairman Barlow for your second time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my intent was to include all of the agencies in there, not just the two that were selected. So that would have been part of the amendment. My suggestion was to let them respond to their audit findings, because I will respectfully suggest none of the directors that we are going to request this are probably the same ones who are subject to the audit findings. So if we look at when the audits were performed and for what years they were performed, that was under a different administration with likely different different appointees, many of them. One of the agencies doesn't even exist anymore. It's been rolled into another agency. So what I'm trying to do is take us a little more methodically into the process. So we can say, we've looked at this, we'd like to understand what you've done in response to these audit findings. And if we find they have failed to respond to the audit findings, then that seems a catalyst to bring them forth. But if we're gonna send out letters to two entities and they're gonna come and say, hey, we covered it, we took care of it, thank you very much, what have we gained from that? I guess that's what I'm trying to get. So, I mean, I'm glad that Representative Gray is excited, but let's also be methodical about what we're gonna try to get and get to. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion? Are you ready for the question? The question is on the amendment. I think Vice Chairman Barlow explained that amendment very well just a second ago. Is everybody clear on the amendment, or anybody have a question on the amendment before we vote on it? Representative Gray.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am a little confused on the motion. So what letter are we sending to all agencies? I mean, we've identified two agencies that had a big problem, and whether or not it's an old administration or not, I mean, the agency continues. The agency is perpetual until it's removed. And yeah, we had a change of one being subsumed. But what are we doing with all agencies now with the letter? I'm confused by that.
I will restate what I understand the effect of the motion to be. And Vice Chairman Barlow, please correct me if I'm inaccurate. That what we would do is we would send a letter to the Office of State Lands and Investments, the Department of Workforce Services, the Department of Enterprise Technology Services, the Department of Revenue, Department of Insurance, the School Facilities Department, Wyoming State Parks and Cultural Resources, the Office of State Public Defender. That we would ask each of them to respond to what they have done in their response to the fact that they had performance measures that on each of the findings that were inadequate, either that there were not measures that prevented certification, or to respond to the weaknesses or other deficiencies that they found in their audits. And then based upon their response, depending on what their response would be to that letter from the chairman, that they may or may not be asked to come before the committee. That probably didn't not even address this letter, but then we would have an opportunity as a committee, or at least as the president, to, if their response was insufficient or unsatisfactory, then we at that point in time, we would invite them, if not compel them, to come from the committee. Or the other thing we do is, obviously we didn't get to this point, but if they simply refuse, then we might, then we would have the opportunity to exercise subpoena power, but all that's kind of premature if they depend on how they respond to the letter. Is that accurately stated, Vice Chairman Barlow? So that's a yes. So that's how I understood the effect of his motion. Senator James.
Just a quick question, Mr. Chairman. How long do they have to respond?
Oh, we'd give them a couple, probably 3 weeks, kind of my mind. But Abby, do you have any idea? I mean, they either have, or I mean, these, they get a couple weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. I mean, that's they either have or they haven't. So it shouldn't be that hard to get us back an answer. Abby or Amanda, your thoughts on response time? We didn't talk about that, but.
Mr. Chairman, I think 2 or 3 weeks would be plenty. We do a similar process, which we were going to talk about later, for follow-ups of our own audit. So it would probably be very similar to that.
Okay. So we're on the motion, are ready to vote on the motion? So all those in favor of the motion, raise your hand so I can see it. Raise your hand to the camera. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm counting 6. Though I'm counting 6 ayes. Those opposed to the motion. Counting 1, 2, 3. 3 no. So the motion, the amendment has passed. We're back on the original question as amended. Is there further discussion on the question as amended? Any other amendments? All are ready for the question? Senator Representative Pelkey? Did you have something? Ready for the question? All those in favor of the original question, which is now to write the letter, raise your hand to the camera. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Basically, it's unanimous. So that motion has passed. We still haven't, before we get to any other motions, is there anybody who's in the public but we didn't have anybody in the room or anybody else that was set up to comment on this, Abby? Okay. Any other items of business on this particular agenda item? That being not being the case, let's take it's 10:23. Let's stand in recess till 10 on my clock. I said 10:33, but 10:23, but whatever, we'll take a 7-minute break and we'll be back here in 7 minutes. Okay. Yeah, go ahead and shut off your microphone and your camera for a minute. Abby, are you on? Can you hear me?
Mr. Chairman, I think she stepped away for just a moment.
All right, that's fine. We'll continue on. We'll go ahead and call our meeting back to order.
Yes, okay.
There you are. A quick question, Abigail. Going back to something Senator James said earlier, is there anything, I was just, I'm inclined to just as the chairman, unless we need committee action, well, I'm inclined to write letters back to the individuals, similar letters to the special districts that Senator James identified, and that we find out, or, Senator James, you want to get those to me. I heard Hanover, but if you want to get those to us, I'm inclined to just send letters out and ask them to respond to whatever they refuse to respond to again. This time come from us, and with the idea of the same thing. Ultimately, if nothing else, we may end up subpoenaing those records. So Abby, my question to you is, that take committee action, or can I just do that as chairman? Vice chairman and I do that together or something?
Mr. Chairman, I think you could send a letter. Whether the subpoena is, I would have to look into the subpoena power and whether that might even extends to political subdivisions. MAC is really set up to look at state agencies right now. So I would have to look into that.
Well, I just, looking at Senator James's reference to the Constitution, says as prescribed, we may need to, do that, because we may or may not have the power to do that. And if we don't, maybe that's something we ought to consider doing. So anyway. Okay, I think we've got a quorum back. So next we were talking about fiscal procedure training requirements for local governments. We've talked about this a couple times. We had staff go out and do that report. And so I think we've got Carla. I think Carla went out and did that report.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Abigail.
I think you have boards and commissions up next.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're right.
Agenda.
Boards and commissions. I'm sorry.
We hit you hard with audits this morning.
So we've got a very similar issue with, thank you for that, Abigail, appreciate that. We're on actually Department of Audit Boards and Commission audit findings that really similar things to what we found out before, but let's go ahead. We don't want to shortchange Danielle's work. So Danielle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. Today I'll be reviewing a report provided in your meeting materials, which reviews the audit findings of boards and commissions.
It's under tab 5 if you've got that. So thank you. Go ahead, Danielle.
The Legislative Service Office reviewed audits conducted by the Department of Audit on Wyoming boards and commissions to identify trends in audit findings and corrective actions. LSO reviewed a total of 36 boards and commissions audits, which were conducted in 2016 pursuant to Wyoming Statute 33-1-302, subsection A4. LSO also reviewed an audit of the Department of Administration and Information, commonly known as A&I, because A&I provided some level of administrative support services to 22 of those boards and commissions. Wyoming statute requires the department or an independent audit firm to conduct periodic audits on the internal controls and financial transactions of boards and commissions. These audits examine the structures, policies, and procedures in place for financial transactions. In 2016, the department conducted 36 audits of boards and commissions. For 17 of those boards, A&I provided full administrative support, meaning they provided budget, fiscal, clerical, and administrative services. 5 of those boards previously mentioned were partially supported by A&I, and 14 boards and commissions were independent, employing their own administrative staff or receiving administrative support from their overseeing state agency. These boards and commissions that receive administrative support from ANI are to pay a reasonable rate established by rule and regulation of ANI for services necessary to support the operation of the licensing board or commission. On page 2, you'll find a list of those boards which are supported by ANI, partially supported, and then are independent. The boards which are supported by ANI are required to develop a memorandum of understanding, or MOU, with ANI, which outlines the responsibilities of the board and the types of administrative support that ANI will provide. Those boards that are partially supported by ANI are also required to develop an MOU. As for objectives and methodology, when conducting the audits of boards and commissions, the department has 4 main objectives. They are to determine whether adequate internal control structures exist to ensure the processing and accounting of all financial transactions, to determine whether expenditures were made for the benefit of the state, whether expenditures were made in compliance with applicable statutes, rules, and regulations, and that reasonable revenue transactions and cash handling procedures were present for the volume and manner in which they were received. Audit procedures included actions such as interviews with staff, a review of that memorandum of understanding that I previously mentioned, and a testing of judgmentally selected sample of expenditures to determine whether or not they were made in compliance with state statute, rule, and regulations. As I previously mentioned, ANI does provide administrative services for 22 of the boards across the state, and thus the Department of Audit, or LSO, reviewed the Department of Audit audit of ANI as part of the boards and commissions audits. This was to determine whether ANI had an adequate internal control structure to ensure the processing and accounting of all financial transactions for those boards. The methods are quite similar to those previously discussed, with the exception that instead of looking at a memorandum of understanding, they interview the senior accountant responsible for that those transactions. The department assessed internal controls as adequate, although the audit did identify weaknesses. Those weaknesses included a lack of policies and procedures to guide employees on fiscal duties, a lack of segregation of duties, weaknesses within the database used to maintain licensing information, and a failure to adopt data policies. Moving on to the trends of findings, which can be found on the bottom of page 4. 4 of the 36 boards and commissions met all audit objectives and received no formal findings. Appendix A, found at the back of this report, provides specific findings and responses to audits by the department. The most common findings among the 36 audits were a lack of data policies pursuant to Wyoming Statute 9-21-101, which was passed in 2016, a lack of defined policies and procedures to review financial transactions, and weaknesses within internal control structures. Of the 36 audits reviewed, the department found that 28 had not developed data policies as required by 9-21-101, and 2 had not included all items required by that statute. All 17 boards receiving full administrative support from ANI, as well as 4 of the 5 partially supported by ANI, needed to develop data policies at the time of their audits. I will remind the committee that these audits were conducted in 2016, and in 2016, the legislature enacted Wyoming Statute 9-21-101, which requires state agencies, including boards and commissions, to adopt, enforce, and maintain a policy regarding the collection and security and use of data. All boards without data policies in place did respond, stating that they would work with staff to draft policies in accordance. Audits also indicated that 21 boards and commissions had not defined policies and procedures to review the financial transactions of the board. In several instances, this meant that there was an MOU in place, meaning that ANI staff would record revenues and expenditures, but the board did not have anything in place to review ANI processing for accuracy. For all audits that included a response, boards had implemented or indicated a plan to implement the recommended policies and procedures. 6 audits found weaknesses in internal control structures that would ensure the appropriate accounting of revenue transactions or expenditures. This included a lack of proper segregation of duties, timesheets left incomplete, or improper usage of the state's uniform chart of accounts for expenditures. 2 boards did not have an MOU in place between the board and ANI, and this was due to turnover within ANI. Both boards were in the final stages of completing an MOU during the time of the audits. 4 boards did not hold meetings as required by their individual practice act, so please disregard the erroneous mention of the Wyoming Public Meetings Act, as that is an error. Those findings which did not clearly fall into any of the aforementioned categories are listed at the bottom of page 5. And with that, I will stand for any questions the committee might have.
Thank you. Members? Questions for Danielle? Representative Gray?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Creech, the Board of Mixed Martial Arts, the revenue and expenditures not being accurately reported, what was the nature of that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray. If you turn to the Appendix A at the back, it includes all of the findings outlined in the summary letter, as well as the recommendations and responses. So if you give me just a moment here to look and remind me which board you had a question about. Mixed martial arts, is that correct?
Yeah. Yes.
It looks like it just said that the revenues and expenditures are not being accurately reported to the state auditor's office, and that the board should work with the state auditor to create and adopt those policies. So I would refer to the department for more specific information on that.
You want to go to the department now, Representative Gray, on that question?
Yeah, that'd be fine.
Members of the department, do you have any additional insight with respect to the Board of Martial Arts?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray, we would have to go back and look at the work papers to identify specifically, but we could get that to you.
Okay, I think please do. I think we're gonna send even if we don't have a motion, I think we're gonna send a series of letters on a number of these things. While we've got you though, let me ask you a question. And we've got, how many boards and commissions do we have, Danielle? How many did you say?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not certain how many boards and commissions there are total, but in the last 10 years, the department has audited 36, which were all reviewed in this report.
Yeah, we got the 36. So we've done 36 audits, and in some cases you've got, I mean, I find alarming, you've got 28 haven't developed data policies required by certain statutes, but the other one that's just as alarming, just really basic, is 21 boards and commissions have not defined policies and procedures to review financial transactions for the board. And I mean, so if you've got 21 out of 36, you know, it's not exactly an extrapolation, but I mean, that tells you that it probably really close to, you know, not quite, but almost 2/3 of our boards and commissions don't have those policies. I mean, if you extrapolate across that, I mean, do you think that's a fair extrapolation, or do you think it's, you don't think it's that bad?
Mr. Chairman, from what I could tell, and I, you know, of course, will defer to the department if they might have better information, but those which did not have those policies were the ones that fell under ANI.
Okay.
So as opposed to it being, you know, 21 boards with differing issues, I think that all kind of falls back on ANI if my analysis is correct.
All right, so of the independent boards and commissions, those, it just seemed to me that they were in much better shape than the ones that weren't. As far as the audit findings, is that your interpretation, Danielle?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the first part of your question, Mr. Chairman.
As far as the independent boards and commissions seem to be in a lot better shape as far as where they are in compliance with audit procedures.
Yeah,
Is that a conclusion you drew as well?
You know, as I looked through the findings, I actually didn't see much differentiation between those which fell under ANI and those which did not.
Okay, thank you. Other questions, members? Department of Audit, do y'all have any comments to make with respect to audits and the findings on boards and commissions?
Mr. Chairman, no.
And do you all audit at least the ones that are that have contracts with A&I to kind of manage their finances and help them out with some of their administrative functions. Do you audit those?
So we audit. Mr. Chairman, Rich Cummings here. These audits here were just specifically done based on the passing of that statute of 33, the one referenced in here. And with that set our objectives. And that's basically what we did there in terms of these boards that A&I managed. So just the ones that qualified under that 33 statute.
And is that a continuing obligation to audit? I mean, they just fall in kind of like other governmental entities as far as your audit responsibilities, or was that just unique to that one statute?
Mr. Chairman, because of that one statute, they fall into it just like state agencies do and things like that.
All right, thank you. Senator Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, a piece of information that I would like that would at least make me feel better about how we're looking at this data. Some of these boards have a similar executive director. And one of the things that I've kind of figured out that happened in health is that we have one of them that we looked at, and the person that was a director on one of them doesn't even have any, he has no experience in that particular field that he's working in as a director. Matter of fact, I mean, I'm not even going to say what he did do but it's totally opposite sides of the spectrum. But I think it's important that we look at that and we see this data and how these things haven't been met. I'd like to see a chart of all the people who do manage these boards, the directors, and also the number of boards, you know, so we can look at it that way. We see the maybe 5 boards have the same executive director. So I'd like to see that data.
Okay. Danielle, I think you guys can pull that together for us, can't you?
Mr. Chairman, I think that would be doable. Yes, I'll have to, of course, refer to Abigail in that regard, but I think that would be doable. Yes.
So Abby, if we do that, my thought off of Senator Bouchard's comment was, yeah, we probably ought to know who our executive directors are, and if we could just get a list of who those executive directors are, of all of them, and maybe if you group the independent boards and commissions are one thing, and those are, I think those fall a little bit different category, but all these ones that come under A&I in particular, if we can group those so that if we can, we just group them by, if we can sort them so we see all executive directors, so anybody if there's a multiple executive director who's executive over multiple commissions, that we see all those together so we can see whether there's 2, 3, or 4, or 5 or who they are. And look, I mean, it's a little bit different animal because other than the initial startup monies, most of these are collected from members, but we do still have legislative oversight over these boards and commissions. So,
Mr. Chairman, we can definitely look into that, and I'm going to double check. We're looking at the licensing boards here.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Members, anything else on these? Vice Chairman Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just to be clear, do you want the executive directors in 2016 or the current executive director?
Current, only interested in current ones.
And so to be clear, Mr. Chairman, so these audit findings were for years prior to 2016. So it may be also relevant to ask these boards, these specific boards, how they have complied with the findings or how they have addressed the findings that were made in 2016. Similar to what we did with the state agencies. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, and I intend to, that's why I'm trying to put this together. I think we want to do that. I think they're a little bit different. Like I say, these are a little bit different animal, but they're still, we still have the responsibility for legislative oversight. So let's go back and find these. I think these maybe because it's not direct taxpayer money. certainly taxpayers are paying in, but most of them are because they belong to, they're belong to some association or professional dues, or in the case of MMI, they got to be licensed in some respects. So it's a little bit different animal, but let's find out where they're at, and let's also give a chance to let's also send out. I think whatever we send out to these folks will also copy the A&I, so that A&I knows we're making these, because some of these I think are inherent issues in A&I that A&I hasn't quite got on top of it. But part of it's the executive director should be more on top of it as well. So. Representative Obermueller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The one thing that makes these a little bit different in terms of the letter is they do actually have responses documented of how they're moving forward, and maybe this letter needs to address, how's that going in terms of the responses? How have they actually applied those?
Right. I think this is a little bit gentler nudge, but still, they need to know people are looking at them. I think it's exactly what some of the senators, some of the board, the members of the committee have said, and certainly what the Department of Audit said, that if you know somebody's looking, you pay more attention. So, anything else? Representative Gray.
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question to the Department of Audit. It's a little broader, but we're moving into the fiscal training is the next one, and then they're leaving. And so could I have your discretion to ask a little bit broader question to the Department of Audit right now?
Sure. I mean,
okay.
Is there anything else? Before we just do that, and maybe as a segue into the next one, is there anything else with respect that's specific to boards and commissions from members of the committee? Is there anybody out there, Abigail or I've forgotten now is there anybody out there in the waiting room or anything like that was supposed to address us today on this issue?
Mr. Chairman, there's nobody in the waiting room.
Okay. So any members of the committee, anything else? If not, then Representative Gray, as a kind of a segue into the next one, go ahead. We'll give you some latitude.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, thanks. That's the right word. Mr. Chairman, I'd be curious, what is the Department of Audit doing now? Because I think it has been pointed out correctly that a lot of these reports, I mean, we're looking at things back 2-3 years. So what are they doing now? We are getting from the Department of Audit when there's a municipality or a local government that's been audited, those are being emailed to us. But how does this committee get better at digesting what you're doing in real time as soon as it comes out? Like what is the plan for the current fiscal year or the calendar year we're in? And what is the recent work, and what are we going to see over the next 3-4 months as the year closes out?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray. So currently on our local government side, we're working on three towns, audits of 3 towns. Just finished up one performance measure audit. We've got a couple of audits in process on the school district side for what we term full audits, and then currently also working on a blitz audit. So full audits, we have 8 areas that we audit for school districts, 8 areas of the funding model. And then a blitz audit, we identify one area that may have issues persistent across all districts. And so then we audit that one area, we audit all districts for that area. So that's in process. We've got a couple of investigations that we're currently assisting DCI with. And then between now and the end of the year is our census period, where we're collecting all of the census reports and related follow-up and producing the cost of government report.
And so, as a matter of course, when you when you finish those audit reports, do you send those over to LSO, Jason?
Mr. Chairman, yes. So we send currently our audit reports. We send a copy to Management Audit Committee, and then if there's any legislative committee that's specific, so school reports, a copy goes to Joint Education. Local government reports, a copy goes to corporations.
Okay, thank you. Representative Gray, anything else? Okay, let's move into the local government fiscal procedures training. And I think Carla, I think you're up on this one.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Management Audit Committee. We have another topic, and this is in your meeting materials under item number 6. So this topic came out of the January Management Audit Committee meeting. The issue brief that was detailing Wyoming statutory requirements for fiscal training for local government fiscal officers. And if you remember, the Wyoming statute requires the state auditor and the state treasurer to provide voluntary education for political subdivision, elected or appointed officials with duties related to public funds. These trainings are directed at the first time elected and appointed officials, as well as an annual continuing education component. The state auditor and state treasurer work in conjunction with several professional associations to develop those trainings. And they include Budget 101, GAAP standards training, accounting manuals, census manuals, a special district handbook and municipal handbook, as well as some instruction on the Wyoming online fiscal system, which is WOLFS. So this topic is to look at other states to see how they manage or what their approach is as far as statutory authority and requirements for fiscal training, fiscal procedures training. So in this issue brief, we examine 9 comparator states to determine and describe each state's requirement and approach to this type of training. So on page 2, you'll see that those 9 comparator states are Arizona, Colorado, Idaho, Montana, Nebraska, New Mexico, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Utah. As we would expect, there are different approaches when looking at these state statutes, and the requirements vary, but all approaches fit into to one of 3 categories. And those categories are, number 1, those states with statutes that require political subdivision officials to complete training. Number 2, states requiring training be provided, but participation is voluntary. And number 3, those states with no requirement to provide or participate in fiscal procedure training for the political subdivision officers. Now I will go and summarize each of these categories. Category 1, of the 9 states, Nebraska and Utah employ the first approach, where the statute is directed at and requires political subdivision officials to complete training. These 2 states make up this category, and I'll talk about Nebraska first. Last spring, the Nebraska legislature introduced a fiscal training requirement legislation, and it was working its way through the process when their legislative session was suspended due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Later this summer, the legislative session resumed. The bill passed, and the governor just signed the bill on August 15th, so that is now law. The bill is directed at county, city, and village treasurers and requires proof of completion of a state auditor-approved education program. And if the official fails to complete the program, the auditor will inform the Attorney General and the county attorney and let them know that the treasurer has not completed the required education program. The state auditor approves the program, tracks attendance, but is not responsible for conducting the training. The training is done in consultation with statewide associations representing counties and cities and villages. While there's no penalty in statute that I was able to find, I was told by an official for the Nebraska Auditor of Public Accounts that they believe that anyone not obtaining the required education would be subject to fines, penalties, or subject to even eventual removal from office. Next, I'll discuss Utah, which is found on your page 7. This state is the second of the 2 states requiring officials to participate in education. This requires each member of a board of trustees of a local district, and they are told that they shall, within 1 year of taking office, complete training. The state auditor, in conjunction with the Utah Association of Special Districts, and with assistance of other state offices, departments, and entities as the auditor deems appropriate, provide the training. The auditor issues a certificate of completion for scores of 75% or more. I did not find an enforcement provision for Utah. So then next we'll go back to page 4, where we look at the second category, and that's where those states require training to be provided, but participation is voluntary. And the majority of the states that we looked at fall into this form of requirement. And these 5 states are Arizona, Colorado, Montana, New Mexico, and South Dakota. Wyoming's approach would also fall into this category. And as you should recall, this statutory requirement wasn't implemented until the current state auditor came into office. Then next, I'll describe the aspects that vary among these 5 states. Montana is a bit different in that their legal authority is not in statute, but instead in administrative rule. And it directs and the other 4 states fall into statutory. Their rules or their requirements are in statute instead of the administrative rule. So when reviewing the requirements, I should note that the terminology for these states vary, but local governments, political subdivisions, and special districts are generally an interchangeable term. Not all states direct their fiscal training towards all local government officers, as you could see with Nebraska and Utah, but the last column in the tables will indicate which officials the state addresses. Also looking at training and oversight providers, the state entities responsible for providing the fiscal procedures training include the state auditor general, agencies with local government divisions, and a legislative Department of Audit for South Dakota. So looking at South Dakota, as well as Arizona, their audit structure is different from the other states. For these, the state auditor position is appointed by the legislature, and they report to the legislature and are dedicated to fiscal matters only. These functions are separate from their program evaluation division, and both are akin to the Wyoming Department of Audit. Arizona's audit office has approximately 220 dedicated employees. Nebraska's Department of Audit is responsible for fiscal compliance and is responsible for approving public accountants who perform governmental audits, and they review those audits for completeness before the auditee can make their final payment to the auditor. The Auditor General is also an ex officio member of the Board of Accountancy Regulatory Board. The training methods also vary by state and by office title, such as treasurer versus a board member. The traditional resources include providing publications such as FAQs, manuals, guides, and news updates and issue memos. Other resources include workshops, conferences, and personal assistance to individuals with specific issue assistance requests. Then there are the web-based resources such as instruction, courses online, and how to do something videos. The topics of training are predictably focusing on providing a general understanding of budgets and accounting practices, with some states providing more specific aspects such as audit standards, completing required forms, job responsibilities, statutory provisions, implementing an accounting system, and fraud prevention, as well as ethics. Now we'll go back and look at the third category, which is on page 5. And these are those states without a statutory or other legal authority to provide training. There are only 2 states in this group, Idaho and North Dakota. And they have no requirement for fiscal training for any political subdivision fiscal officer. And instead, they rely on professional organizations to provide this fiscal training. Several of the professional associations are the state affiliates of national associations, and they have job-specific certifications available with some of those. And an Idaho Professional Association official indicated that many of the city fiscal job officer jobs now require certification. So as I mentioned earlier, there are other states who include professional associations assist with their training resources. So that completes my summary of the issue brief. And at this time, I'll take any questions.
Thank you. Members, any particular questions? Let's the Department of Audit folks still on? Are they gone? Yep, no, there they are. So let me ask you all with respect to that. I mean, as you go out and you and you find a number of either issues, weaknesses, or other issues, what percentage do you all think it has to do with lack of training?
Mr. Chairman, I for special districts, for sure, I would suspect that a lot of the issues have to do with training. You get a lot of smaller special districts where you might have volunteers that are managing the finances and doing the reporting, and I think it's fairly common that those volunteers don't have as broad of a background as you would expect.
And with respect to our departments and agencies, I mean, certainly not all financial officers are created equal. I mean, just kind of across our Wyoming state government, how many of the problems are associated with just lack of knowledge or lack of training?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know a lack of I don't know if it's a lack of knowledge or training. I think in your state level positions tend to be people with those backgrounds, but I'm not sure that the findings are a result of lack of knowledge or training.
Okay. Well, I can just tell you my experience on appropriations and watching financial officers come before you and present their budgets. I think that my experience is that not all chief financial officers are created equal, and that some are excellent and some you wonder how in the heck they have that job. But anyway, that being the case, we'll move on. So members, Representative Obermuller.
There we are. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A question for Carla on your study of these other states. Do any of these states in that study, to your knowledge, require any kind of standardization like standard charts of accounts, or required to use a centralized accounting environment, such as like we have with Wolves? Is there any standardizations that you've run across?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Overmueller, there were a couple of them. I think New Mexico comes to mind first and foremost, that that they are required to have a uniform form of accounting and make sure that it's complied with. They also have a certain internal system that keeps track of all the audits and how the special districts report, and so that assists with the uniformity. They also make sure that they train to that, and it is the auditor's job to assure, well, the Department of Local Government's job to assure that all the special districts are in compliance.
Carla, if there was a requirement to use the Wolf system, how much of the state could actually do that, in your opinion, based on lack of connectivity in some parts of the state? But as a general idea of everybody on the Wolf system, what level of compliance could we consider getting in that, with that idea?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Overmueller, I'm not sure how well that would work, especially with some of the very small districts. I know that WOOFs can be included in training, and that would probably be for the larger groups. But as far as implementing what they do through WOOFs, I think that would be a good question for the state auditor, and she'll be on in a little bit.
Thank you.
Thank you. Members, other questions of Carla and about this training element? Carla, I've got a couple of questions for you. All right, here they are. Jotted down when I was going through this. When you went out in the states that did require training, was there a period of time in which, after an individual was either appointed or elected to that office, in which they had to complete that training? Did you get that far down into it when you were looking at these other states?
Mr. Chairman, generally there wasn't a required time, but with a couple of the states, and now I believe it's Nebraska, and I'll have to look again, but they require it for the new officials. So it would be Nebraska and Utah to complete it within 1 year, or else they're deemed to fail to be compliant. And that's when the action can be taken, or they can be removed for Nebraska. Utah, once completed in a year, but like I said, I didn't find any penalty for non-compliance.
Okay, thank you. So in comparison in our statutes, and did you find any place other than the auditor where an elected official or someone else, or in fact, any requirements anywhere with respect to training before someone has a certain job, other than maybe specific job description qualifications? Would you find anything in statute or regulation required certain obligation, certain training or certain level of training before a person can have or hold a job or an office?
Mr. Chairman, I did not, but I wasn't specifically looking for that. I was looking at it kind of from the other end on what the states require. But no, when I was going through the audit requirements, I did not locate anything like that. If you would like, I can go through and check that specific topic.
It'd be interesting. I think it'd be helpful. Maybe just take a look at it. I mean, the only place I've come across it that I could think of one was the coroner. And so in 7.4 in chapter or Title 7, Chapter 4, which has to do with county coroners, specifically Section 7.4.103 requires that after January 5th of 1987, no person shall continue in an office or basically shall serve in the office unless they have at least 1 year after assuming the office, have the basic coroner course, and then 2, have a continuing education requirement promulgated by the Board of Coroner Standards, and then references to some other statutes. So other than those 2, I haven't found anywhere else that we require any type of specific training in order for a person to have office. And if they don't, under the penalty for that, if the coroner doesn't, any person who knowingly fails to comply with subsection A, which is the requirement for training, and continues in his office is guilty of a misdemeanor punishable by a fine of $25 per day for each day of non-compliance. That's the only place I could find in Wyoming statute where we were implementing and required, particularly with elected officials. And so, which mostly would apply to potentially treasurers and county treasurers and county clerks. But even for our treasurer and our auditor, I don't think that, those elected offices have no requirement for training. So I don't know, members, the choice is whether you enforce this or not, and if you do, how you enforce it. So, Senator James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I kind of came up with a bill proposal for this particular situation, kind of crossed Utah and Arizona, picked some stuff out of both of their statutes, and I'll send that to everyone right now so you guys can follow along. So it reads, the auditor can order and enforce a uniform system of accounting for all political subdivisions to complete training and obtain a certificate of competition within 1 year of taking office. The training is required each time an official is elected or fills a midterm vacancy. And so Wyoming state legislators shall establish expenditure limitations, and the state auditor shall provide detailed instructions on the proper mode of keeping accounts of their offices, completion and submission of required reports. Accordingly, the auditor provides a uniform accounting manual for Wyoming counties which specifies internal controls for accounting and financial reporting in conformity with statutory requirements and generally accepted accounting principles. Additionally, the Auditor General offers training and resources specific to each political subdivision, charter schools, cities and towns, community colleges, school districts, special districts, and universities. These resources include some or all of the following areas: FAQs, forms, fraud prevention alerts, manuals and memos, reporting guides and webinars. Training is accessed through the Office of the State Auditor's online training portal or a YouTube channel. The 2020 training course curriculum includes qualifications and responsibilities, policies and procedures, introduction to budgeting, government record access, separation of duties, clerk and treasurer, ethic and nepotism laws, and fraud risk assessment overview. The webpage also provides forms, manuals, and guides on uniform accounting methods and other topics. Now, in this email that I sent to everyone, it has little footnotes there that will give you links to Utah and Arizona. That'll give you more information about how these states do this. So I think if we were to implement this here in Wyoming, that would help out a lot with a lot of the issues that we currently suffer from. And that's the bill proposal that I have, so.
Thank you. Thank you. Other members, other comments or questions? Senator Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't want to get into all the details of something that I ran into, but I will skim the surface on it. Had some reports that there was some misproprieties in a local, in a county agency, and we got several phone calls on it. Everybody knew about it, but I did have there was nothing on paper. I had sent somebody down to, they said, if you go to records, you'll find it. Well, you know how that is. It's a big room full of file cabinets. So sent somebody down there, and they called me and said, I don't know how we're going to find it in there. And I said, hey, go talk to the girl at the counter. You know, and he said there was a girl at the counter. I said, yeah, we'll go talk to her and be friendly and tell her what you're looking for. Called me in 20 minutes, said, I got it. There was a scathing letter from the county accountant to this, and I'm not going to mention who it was, but it was pretty clear there was a problem there. And what they did is they took money out of a construction fund, and they moved it over, and they took it and basically prepaid a contractor, or a vendor, I should say, not a contractor, a vendor for goods. So obviously that was illegal. And I called the county accountant with that letter in hand, and the only fatal mistake I made is not having a recorder going, because when I asked him about the letter, he said that to quote him, he said, "You were never supposed to see that letter." And I said, well, what do you keep, 2 sets of books? You keep one? Is this like the mafia? You got one set of books on one side that the public sees and one that we don't? I mean, this is pertinent to information that people should know about. So without, I can produce those documents too if anybody wants them, but it's just crazy that people didn't really know that we're running an agency, made those kind of decisions, and then had to be reprimanded, and it was. So that being said, this is where this kind of stuff comes into play. What Senator James is talking about is exactly how this would come into play, and to correct these issues, whether it was deliberate, whether it was intentional, whether there were things going on that were nefarious or not. This is how we try to fix these things. Anyway, thanks.
Thank you, Representative Pelkey.
Thank you. Frankly, I would love to see those documents, and I would ask that you share them with all members of the committee. At this point, it's anecdotal evidence, and I'd like to see something solid that I can review and base an opinion on, rather than secondhand information. So, Senator Bouchard, if you could forward that to me and to the other members of this committee, I'd be grateful.
Senator Bouchard?
It becomes part of open records, and I will tell you, it's damaging to somebody that's in elected office. So, if you want to pull that trigger, we can pull it. But
I thought you just said it was in your public records anyway. So if it's public record, it's public record, right?
Mr. Chairman, I do agree. I guarantee you wouldn't find it anywhere if you went to look for it. But yeah, we can do it.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, go ahead and do it. It's the whole purpose is to be transparent. Representative Obermuller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And question for Senator James on the memo. I was wondering if he had the discussion with the state auditor about and feedback from their office on the content of this memo.
I think that question was a Senator Bouchard, I think, right?
No, Mr. Chairman, this is for Senator James on his memo.
Senator James. Okay, go ahead, Senator James.
No, I have not.
Okay. Representative Crank.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is a question for Senator James, and I'm going to go to your memo also. I have a little question on, I think it's the 3rd and 4th line. The Wyoming legislature shall establish expenditure limitations. And what are you meaning to get to by expenditure limitations? The amount where you have this training required, or the legislature establish what we pay people?
But, Mr. Chairman, it's whatever we feel is necessary. We appropriate funds. So if we feel that something is being if we feel that we're overspending on something, then we have that right to set those limitations. So that's what that is there for.
So,
Go ahead, Representative Crank.
so that would be basically just an all-encompassing statement that the legislature will establish expenditure limitations. Again, my question is for what? I just need a little more detail what we're looking for there. This is my only real question there.
Yes, we shall establish expenditure limitations. I mean, I don't know. I think I may not understand exactly what you're asking. I mean, I think that's clear on what that says. I may not be understanding exactly what you're asking.
You know, and expenditure limitations have a broad connotation. They can be, most often they, you know, if you look, you know, your Constitution provides certain expenditure limitations. You can't expend public funds for a private benefit is kind of the most common example of a expenditure limitation. But in addition to that, obviously you could put additional expenditure limitations on both the type of expenditure that any kind of different political subdivision could make, as you know, by category. Can they, you know, for example, another really common expenditure is, you know, this, you cannot spend state money on alcohol beverages. You just don't, you don't get a, you know, there's not a place in a public budget for alcohol expenditures, except for maybe in the Department of Liquor. But anyway, so some of those are all common types of expenditures. Other types are limitations on contracts with relatives, you know, kind of nepotism. There are all kinds of limitations that you can put on expenditures. In addition to that, you could just put, you know, there can be caps on certain, you know, there's another type you could put caps on things, although that becomes problematic. I guess a question I would have for Senator James, as you look at that, I mean, would you draw a distinction between the sizes out of all 400 and almost 500 special districts, most of whom spend less than $500,000? Would you require that of all of them? Would you require different levels of training for each one, or have you thought that far down the road yet?
I just thought of this a few days. That's why I put this up for discussion. I mean, this wasn't for me to think of everything. This is up for us as a committee to discuss. As awesome as that would be to come up with all the answers, this is more of a committee decision, but I think that this is definitely a good base to start from.
Okay, thank you. Members, we're still on this subject of fiscal procedures and training. It's a you know, if you also remember, I think it was in January, we also had, she was the town clerk of the town of Pavilion, if I remember right, came and talked to us in January. She and another lady came and they were talking about, and I think in Carla's presentation, she talked about the fact that some places also recognize not only that the auditor or the Department of Audit provide that training, but also that they provided that kind of training. And so there's another area there where you could also not necessarily mandate, but certainly make as an option available for that training. Some of these other private organizations that do, I think it was the Association of Town Treasurers or something like that. I can't remember the exact name. I'm sure we could find it because they testified, but you know, they offered that, and you know, those are all opportunities that we can provide. The whole thing is, how do you provide that training that it needs without becoming so onerous that you can't get people to sign up and provide those services, the volunteer services we need from so many of our communities on their various, you know, on all these special districts. So tough questions. Representative Obermuller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Personally, I'd like to have the state auditor weigh in on a lot of these issues. They're relevant issues, but that office has definitely been moving forward with their own ideas in this area. I'd like to hear those before we do anything with it. Thank you. Mr.
Thank you. Representative Pelkey?
Just a clarification, that organization that you referred to, Mr. Chairman, is WAMCAT, the Wyoming Association of Municipal Clerks and Treasurers. And that's, you can access their site at wamcat.org.
Thank you. So thank you. So I think that's not a bad idea talking to the treasurer. Anything else on this topic before we leave it? We're not done with it yet. I think that we have the treasurer coming here later. We can also we bring it back up at that point in time. If there's not anything else, is there any other public comment on this or anybody in the waiting room on this one? Abby or?
Mr. Chairman, there's nobody in the waiting room for this.
Okay.
The state auditor did just join. If you would like feedback from her now, I can admit her.
So Madam Auditor, are you here today?
I'm admitting her right now. There she is.
Auditor Racinas, are you there? Good morning, Auditor Racinas. Welcome.
Mr. Chairman, I didn't want to butt in, but I thought I would
We're more than happy to have you butt in, Madam Auditor.
log in a touch early if there were any questions that you would like me to attempt to respond to now.
Did you catch any part of our just previous discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I did, but I have not seen the memo provided by Senator James.
Well, I'm sure we can get Senator James to forward that to you, but just as far as from your perspective and just bring us up to date. I know in ours, you guys provide that training. You've offered that training. It got shut down. A couple of the sessions got shut down because of COVID, but let us know where you're at with training and chart of accounts and uniform usage of chart of accounts, and let us know on a couple of those, if you could just kind of bring us up to date on a couple of those issues we've talked about this morning.
Sure, Mr. Chairman.
I just sent it to you.
Senator James said he just sent it to you. Yeah.
Sure, Mr. Chairman. I'll try to address a couple of those things. And Carla did address this, but one of the comments she made, I might have misinterpreted a little bit, so I'll make sure I clarify that. The statute that requires my office and the treasurer's office to provide training has actually been around for quite some time, but we're not terribly knowledgeable on if or how that has been implemented in recent years. So we came across that statute. Admittedly, we're kind of like, oh, heck, gosh, we better be doing this. This statute says we shall. So we immediately worked with some of those organizations, both WAMCAT, as Representative Pelkey mentioned, and the county association as well. We really were raring to go. We were scheduled to participate at WAMCAT conferences in March. That one was canceled. And then the counties in June, that one was canceled. So we still very much intend to do that. But obviously the pandemic has muddied that up a little bit. In terms of, gosh, sorry, I'm trying to be concise and not waste your time. I believe Representative Obermueller discussed the possibility of using WOLFs or a standardized accounting system statewide. And then there was some discussion of a standardized chart of accounts, and those two things would have to go hand in hand. And I love that thought, because the more uniform we are, the more efficient we are. And part of the barrier of providing training to so many different political subdivisions and entities is that standardization. I can't provide effective training to an entity that uses a completely different accounting system is under different budgeting rules and statutes and doesn't operate at all like the state. So there's some barriers there, but I don't think that means there isn't gains to be made. But again, a lot of the training we could or will provide is going to be very, very generalized as far as good internal controls, good accounting procedures, but there's, as far as errors go and high level accounting pronouncements, that's going to vary a lot based on size. A few other notes really quickly. And I didn't catch all the discussion on what all the problems with that had been reported in municipalities in their audit. Many of them are already going to be under contracts with accounting systems for some time. There's a problem of standardized chart of accounts. One other note that would be a challenge to some sort of uniformity would be the state's biennial budget versus most of those other entities are going to operate on an annual basis. And someone asked the question as to whether, and I apologize, I can't remember who, how ready they would be to switch to something, or essentially the different levels of sophistication that exist within all of those. And I can speak from personal experience, Mr. Chairman. I have been in some municipal entities that are still 100% on paper. So there certainly is a wide variety of systems there. You know, Mr. Chairman, the other one thing I wanted to address is there was discussion of fraud and misappropriation. And I think that controlling that and having a reporting mechanism is critical. But one thing I wanted to just say out loud is no amount of training on proper procedures will completely avoid fraud or misappropriation, which has intent behind it. Now, there could be some, if you train everyone and someone might be equipped to recognize it, perhaps, but in general, though we're trying to solve two separate problems, an internal control problem versus a just not having the right tools in your toolbox problem. So, Mr. Chairman, I don't want to ramble on any more than that. But if there's any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank
and
you.
I hope I'm not one of those bad CFOs that you were referencing.
Oh, the people of the state of Wyoming obviously think you're more than competent. So yeah, office. So anyway, we're Representative Pelkey, you've got your hand up.
Thanks. And I'm among those who think that you are more than competent. You know, in your analysis in retrospective, you know, we're all in favor of making sure that everyone complies with regulation. We're all intent upon making sure that there's proper auditing, proper financial accounting. What I'm curious about that is if you've had the opportunity to look back, say over the last 10 years, how much of the problem, how many of the problems that we've had are simply because people are unaware or not complying with regulation, and how much actual intent to defraud the people of Wyoming? Were there instances where somebody intentionally misdirected funds to defraud the people of Wyoming, as opposed to just sloppy bookkeeping?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Pelkey, I think there is fraud, there is misappropriation, and we have real examples of that have happened in Wyoming. And I don't think it's rampant, but I guarantee that there are probably instances of that have not been identified. However, by and large, every accounting error, every finding on an audit report, they are due to lack of tools, lack of knowledge, lack of sophistication. And on many of those smaller, on the smaller shops, your special districts, your cities, towns, counties, it's a lack of people. You can't have proper, and I'm guessing that the internal or the external auditors would agree with me on this. You can't have really, really solid A+++ internal controls when you only have one person doing your books. It's just not possible. So there's very much a balance there of paying for skill set and sophistication and staff and the risks you take elsewhere. But I do think, and I would say one other note, the Department of Audit report that that Carla did a really good job of presenting on, you'll notice that many of those findings and many of those problems with smaller entities, you'll note that a lot of them said they don't have policies to fill in the blank. They don't have data policies. Now, I'm not making light of the findings in those reports at all, but I would just point out to take it with a grain of salt, because a lot of these places may have okay controls or their processes may be just fine, but the bar is higher. They have to be written down. And so maybe your policies with your data are great, but they're not documented. And so I would guess that that's some of the problems as well. Again, not making light of those, but I feel like there could be, there's varying levels of severity to those findings, I would say.
Thank you so much. Just a quick follow-up, and I'm not going to pin you down on a number, but you know, if you were to throw a number out, how much of those problems that we've encountered in assessing violations, potential violations, involve intent and rise the level of fraudulent abuse of public funds versus what you described as a lack of sophistication or just the absence of rules?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Pelkey, I really want to be able to answer that question, but I mean, my office doesn't see all of those audits or review them, so I would probably have to throw the Department of Audit under the bus and have them respond to that a little bit. My guess would be very, very small.
Well, I have no intention of asking you to throw anyone under the bus, and I really appreciate your time. So thank you.
Let's go ahead and run over to the Department of Audit, folks, and ask if you've got any anything you'd like to add or say in this discussion.
Mr. Chairman, I would probably say my feeling is there's probably more fraud than people think are happening. I'd say at any given point, we're usually assisting on around a handful of investigations with DCI. Now, in terms of percent, I probably couldn't venture a guess on percent, but I would suspect that there's more going on than, say, the average person would guess.
Okay, thank you. So we got from very little bit to more than we think. So somewhere in there, but you don't know what you don't know, right? So the I guess a question I would ask both Madam Auditor and also the Department of Audit, as we talk about training, I mean, we've kind of, I think, mostly talked about the folks that are actually doing the training, the treasurers, the clerks, and those types of folks. But in addition to that, how much, particularly in these small places where you have not, quite frankly, not enough staff to have a proper division of labor so you can have the proper internal controls. But, how much, and this will be subjective. I know that we don't have a lot of data to back this up, but from your kind of experience, how much would also be helpful if our governing bodies, our boards of trustees and our boards of commissioners and our city councils and town councils and our boards of directors on our special districts, if they had a little bit more knowledge and paid a little bit more attention to what was going on inside the finances of their various organizations. Madam Auditor, we'll go to you first.
Mr. Chairman, thanks for that question. That's going to be huge, and it's critical in that risk mitigation. One of your number one mitigation tools when you have segregation of duty issues that you can't solve is going to be mitigating controls, and a solid involved oversight board of any structure is going to be very, very much worth its weight in gold as far as mitigating those risks. Again, if you have, I think the one thing I would say, and this is just my opinion, there's not that many people that are set out on committing fraud. They get into a situation that is challenging, and they have the opportunity to do so. They did not wake up one day and say, I'm going to go steal money from my employer. It's generally more of a combination of needing, being in a tough spot and having the opportunity. And so that strong oversight is very, very helpful, and other things. And again, the external auditors are way better to talk to than me, but controls like 2 signatures on checks, even things like printing all the expenditures in the local newspaper. Those are great controls that help out there. And they're important because we can't solve the segregation of duties issues. It does not make sense to have 3 CPAs on staff in every one of our small towns. That's not affordable.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to the Department of Audit and see if they have what their thoughts are on that question.
Mr. Chairman, we would agree. Involvement by the governing body would go a long way towards at least helping mitigate the risk of separation of duties. And that's actually something we talk about with our local government entities when we have separation of duties issues, is potential ways where the governing body could be involved to help mitigate that risk.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, members, we're anything else on this on topic 6, the training requirements for local governments? Senator Bouchard.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I sent everybody in the committee an email on obviously it's a different subject, but it's a Medicaid fraud cover-up. And I'm concerned about what happens when we do find something. What happens in the action of government all the way down to the end of it. Like I said, there's an attached document that shows the person that they fired actually went over to the feds and turned evidence over to them, was actually a plaintiff on the case with the federal government to actually prosecute the fraudster. So that said, I mean, it's like a chain of events happen as it isn't dealt with, and it becomes worse and worse and worse. And I think that's what we need to look at. I mean, it's not that we're saying everybody's a fraudster. We're saying that it happens. How do we deal with it? And so, like I said, I sent you an email. I think it needs to be reviewed as a case study and how it happens and what happens and all the people that become wrapped up in it, and maybe help us get into a discussion of how we move forward in this committee.
Okay, thanks so much. Appreciate that. And I see your email there. All right, let's move on to the The next topic, which is the city review of coronavirus relief grant expenditures, political subdivisions in the state. Fred, we've got you in here, but I don't know if you're going to punt to someone else.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll tee it up if I may, and I'll try to be brief. When I was invited to visit with the committee about this issue, I think the invitation initially said something like what the Department of Audit is doing about CARES. And at that point, I didn't have my hands around any directive that we'd received to be involved in the process. And so I visited with the governor's office, I visited with the state auditor's office, MHP a little bit. And then I had some really helpful conversations with Carla Smith at LSO. And Carla was really helpful in kind of framing what the committee was looking for from the Department of Audit. And I don't know if she's going to go over her work, but she did put together this very helpful memo on the summary of the grant funding process for political subdivisions. And so when we think about the Department of Audit and what we're doing right now about special districts and grant funding and that type of thing, it kind of goes back to some of the discussions we had this morning as to how we look at those special districts. Carla's work here in summarizing it talks about the very well-documented process for these special districts and municipalities to apply for CARES funding, how it goes through the SLIB, how it goes through Attorney General review, how it goes through the state auditor's office in terms of disbursements and all the checks and controls along the way. The State Loan and Investment Board has a nice PowerPoint that Carla included in there. There is a reference to Department of Audit on page 3 that talks about CRG applications being considered by the board. Applicants must be in compliance with all applicable reporting requirements with the Wyoming Department of Audit. So that's all to say in summary that where our role right now, as we understand it without further direction, is that we would, as part of our normal special district review and audits, we would see how they handle grants. And I'll tee that back up then for Justin Chavez to talk about how we would do that in terms of this particular one.
Thank you, Fred. Justin?
Mr. Chairman, and so in general, as we would with other type of grant funding, we do that on a risk basis when we're looking at our auditees. And so what we would do is look at the agency that's responsible for distributing that money and what kind of controls that agency has over those grant funds. And then that would drive our level of testing, if you will. So if it's an entity that has good, strong controls over those funds and the application process, the distribution process, then we're not going to do a lot in terms of testing those expenditures related to those grants. But if we're looking at a granting agency that has poor or no controls, then we're going to look at those in more detail.
Okay, thank you. Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I wanted to ask a question from the PowerPoint. Is it an appropriate time to do that?
Well, as we look at where we're at, and why don't we go back to Carla, and because Carla, you put this together, you put together this report, and you've also, I think that PowerPoint is also your work. Why don't you do you want to give us you want to walk us through that for right now, and at least get us through your initial part, and then looking at the time, if you want to give us your initial part, and then maybe what we'll do is if the committee wants to actually go through the PowerPoint, or they want to be taken to the PowerPoint, or they want to look through the PowerPoint over the lunch break, we can do either one. So Carla, why don't you take it from here and start us into your work on this?
Sorry. Certainly, Mr. Chairman, in looking at this, the like Department of Audit stated that they're not directly involved up front, except that the grant application entity needs to be current on their audits. But the interim topic is priority number 1, and it's related to the work request, Department of Audit. It appears that Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, or CARES, will require a state review of the expenditure of funds distributed to Wyoming for compliance with the CARES Act, including funds that are granted or otherwise distributed to political subdivisions of the state. The committee may be a good vehicle to study how compliance by political subdivisions can be evaluated and the potential ramifications of noncompliance. So to begin with, I talked with the Department of Audit, the State Auditor's Office, and OSLI. OSLI is the entity that is in charge of vetting the applications, managing them, and then turning over the information to the Department of Audit, or the State Auditor's Office, for payment through WOLFs. So I outlined the basic process, just really gave you a short summary. If you'd like me to go through that, I'd be more than happy. But then I provided, in your section number 7, the PowerPoint is the emergency rules provided by, or set up by, the Department of OSLI, and they provide the PowerPoint. I asked for their permission to provide it to you because I thought it was succinct and well presented. So that gives you the outline of how they're setting up the Then the other attachment is the meeting minutes from August 6th. And they're meeting, the SLIB board, they're meeting every couple of weeks to start going and providing approval or decisions on these grant applications. So they had a meeting August 26th, which was last Wednesday, but those meeting minutes don't have the actual determination on the grant. So that's why I went ahead and provided the earlier one to you. And so that's just the section J2 that has the grants. And it shows you what the entities are, what they're requesting, and what it's for. And when they go to these meetings after the approval vetting at the OSLI staff and at the Attorney General, then there's testimony taken as well as the information reviewed for the recommendations by all involved. And that's when the SLIB board decides to approve or deny, or they can restrict the amount of funds provided, meaning that an applicant may ask for a certain amount and the board will restrict it to a lower amount. They look at all the recommendations, whether the recommendation was to deny or not. And like I said, they receive testimony from the various entities applying. And they also keep track of each grant individually, and so that they are assured that they know where the entity is in its spending and reimbursement requests at all times. And as the summary provides, they cut the entity off, or the applicant awardee, as soon as they reach that the award amount. So while they can track all of these entities, they don't have the ability, their system doesn't have the ability right now to filter, such as, if you want to know all city fire districts, what their amounts are, you wouldn't be able to get that. But I wanted to make note that last Wednesday's meeting, they went ahead and approved or accepted a model for allocation for the funds to replace the request for funds by individual amounts. So they'll have a formula for determining what funds are available for different entities, different groups of entities. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you. I think unless there's specific questions on that right now. I'm showing it's right at 12 o'clock right now. My plan would be when we come back that if the committee wants that we can go through that PowerPoint if you want. Otherwise, we'll go into a discussion if there's any other discussion on this, and then we'll keep moving on. We've got we're a little bit behind, but we're not scheduled to go all day, so I think we're okay time-wise. So with that, if nothing else, we'll take our noon recess until 1 o'clock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Are we staying on? Are we going to come back into this meeting, Abby?
Mr. Chairman, I was going to take us off from going live.
So we should just stay signed in. You'll just take us off being live. We'll just pick up at 1.
Yes.
Like every other break. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
All right.
you.